A howl at midnight that no one could explain, until she found the tapes. The first time Ayla heard it, she thought it was the wind. But Cale wasn't looking at the trees. He was looking at the stars. Some say dogs howl at the moon out of instinct. But if you've ever truly known a German Shepherd, especially one trained for war, you know they howl when memory stirs something too deep to bark. Ayla followed the sound across the field that night. She didn't call to him, didn't interrupt, just stood beside him. 12 years old, barefoot, in frost-touched grass. And when Cale finally stopped howling, she whispered the truth that even adults had failed to grasp. He doesn't obey me. He remembers her. This story begins where most stories end, with ashes buried beneath an old war tree and a girl trying to understand the weight of legacy. What she uncovers at the old compound isn't a weapon. It's something far more dangerous. A voice, a message meant for a dog and a daughter. Stay with us, because by the end, you'll hear it too. The sun hovered low, casting an amber glow across the tribal compound's ceremonial grounds. Dust swirled lazily over the hardened earth, whispering along the edges of a forgotten past. In the center stood the arena of Shadow's open circular patch of land ringed by towering redwood pillars wrapped in faded ceremonial cloth. Each cloth bore the crest of the families that made up the sovereign Copa tribe. But today, no dance drums played. No songs carried the wind. Today was a day of reckoning. Wooden bleachers groaned under the weight of gathered body elders draped in bone necklaces, children with faces painted in white ash, warriors in full regalia standing silent at attention. All eyes faced the center. They weren't there for spectacle. They were there for Cale. Inside the holding gate, at the northern edge of the arena, a low, guttural growl trembled the iron bars. The beast was awake. Cale, a retired military K9, German Shepherd, age unknown, records incomplete. All they knew was that he had once served in Black Ops missions so secret, even the military never claimed him. He bore the scars of those secrets ribs outlined against his flanks, half his right ear missing, and a gaze so sharp it cut through flesh and history alike. Rumors told of a dog who had once taken down an armed insurgent unit single-handedly when his handler was killed. Others whispered that no Juanino one could get close to him now. "Still want to parade that thing in front of our youth?" one elder muttered, side-glancing the man who stood with arms crossed near the ceremonial fire. It was High Chief Tomas. He said nothing. His jaw clenched. The same jawline as the girl he had abandoned 13 years ago. This demonstration wasn't just about Cale. It was about legacy, control, redemption, and secrets too long buried. From the arena's edge, the head trainer, Nako, raised his hand. He was lean, alert, and clearly uneasy. "Open the gate." The click of the latch echoed across the compound like a distant gunshot. Cale emerged like a phantom from Shadow's shoulders, low, eyes forward, the air around him humming with silent warning. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He just stared straight through the crowd, through the ring of elders, into a place none of them could see. Children in the front rows leaned back instinctively. One toddler began to cry. A mother clutched her son and whispered a prayer in the old tongue. Cale stood at the center of the arena, unmoving, like a monument to forgotten violence. Nako swallowed hard and gave a low, practiced whistle. "Cale, heel." Nothing. He tried again, louder. The dog didn't budge. Instead, Cale slowly turned his head not toward Nako, but toward the ceremonial platform where Thomas stood. Their eyes locked. Something passed between them. Not recognition. Cale had never met Thomas before, but a scent, a presence, a connection of blood, perhaps distant, old. Then Cale's lips pulled back, revealing yellowed fangs. A low growl rumbled up from his chest, shaking like a storm waiting for the first crack of thunder. Nako stepped forward cautiously. "Cale, stand down." Too late. Cale charged not toward Nako, but toward the ceremonial platform. Screams erupted from the crowd. Elders stood up. Guards fumbled for tranquilizers. But Cale didn't leap. He didn't attack. He stopped dead 10 feet from the platform and sat. Saturday. Like a soldier awaiting command. Everyone froze. Tomas took one step forward, hand instinctively hovering near the ceremonial dagger on his belt. His throat tightened. Kael stared at him, unblinking, breathing hard, tense, but still. Then, from behind the platform's curtain, a sound broke the trance. Footsteps, soft, hesitant, barefoot against gravel. A girl emerged, 12, tall for her age, a braid running down the center of her back, dust clinging to the hem of her skirt, her eyes wild and steady carried the same defiance as her mother's once did. No one recognized her, but Kael did. The dog's ears twitched. He turned. His body shifted not as a predator, but as something older, familiar. "Easy," the girl whispered, stepping down into the arena, her voice like breath on glass. "It's okay, boy." Kael's head tilted. His breath slowed. One of the elders hissed, "Get her out of there. That dog's unstable." But she didn't stop. She walked slowly, deliberately, until she stood just 3 feet from him. Kael's muscles coiled, but not to attack. He lowered his head. One paw inched forward, then another, then another. The entire arena held its breath. The girl raised her hand, not fast, not sudden, just enough to brush the air. A word passed from her lips. Not a command, a memory. Sevka. The trigger phrase, Russian, rare, obsolete, used only by medics in war zones to soothe traumatized K9S. Kael froze. His ears lowered. His head dropped. Then, against all training, all prediction, Kael crept forward and pressed his muzzle against the girl's chest. A gasp swept through the crowd. Tomas went pale, because he knew in that moment who the girl was, and who her mother must have been, Kael whimpered. The girl knelt and wrapped her arms around him. No fear, no hesitation, only something long denied. Recognition. Kael licked her arm. Once, twice. The beast, they called Unbreakable, had just chosen his side, and it was hers. The drums had just begun their slow, resonant cadence when a hush fell over the arena knot, the reverent silence of ceremony, but the kind that feels like the earth itself holding its breath. A ripple moved through the crowd, sharp and fast, like wind cutting through wheat. She appeared out of nowhere, a small figure, walking along the edge of the ceremonial grounds, her black boots scuffing the red clay. The hem of her coat swayed around her knees, and her backpack bounced lightly with each step. Her hair, wild with wind and sun, caught the afternoon light like a banner. She couldn't have been more than 12, and she had no idea where she was. At first, the watchers assumed she was part of the ceremony, maybe a late addition, maybe a symbolic role. But the way she walked curious, unscripted, dispelled that illusion fast. The way her head tilted, scanning the platform where the dog Kael now stood chained, ears locked forward, that wasn't performance. That was unfiltered curiosity. One of the elders rose abruptly, his voice cracking like thunder. "Get her out of there." The words bounced off the stone walls surrounding the arena. Gasps spread like fire. A second elder stood, then a third. Panic seeped into the carefully laid ceremonial order. Spectators craned their necks. Some instinctively stepped back. Kael had been unchained just moments ago. The dog stood still, massive and taut with muscle. Head lowered slightly as if sniffing the wind. His tongue flicked once. Then he stepped forward. Just once. "Ayla!" The girl turned at the sound of her name, blinking slowly, like someone waking from a dream. Ayla. That was her name. No one knew how she had gotten there. The security lines were tight. The entrances had been watched. But there she was, standing at the base of the sacred stone steps, less than 20 feet from Kael. One of the younger guardians lunged toward her, his voice strained with urgency. "Don't move, Ayla!" But she had already taken another step forward, her gaze locked not on the men or the voices, but on the dog. Kael didn't growl. He didn't lunge. He didn't snap or patch or bar his teeth. He simply stood there, nostrils flaring once as if catching something in her scent, something old, something familiar. The atmosphere thickened like fog. Ayla raised her hand, not in fear but in quiet wonder, the kind only a child carries. "You're not a monster," she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. "Stop!" A woman screamed from the far side of the arena. "That dog has killed people! He doesn't know boundaries!" But Ayla kept walking. Step by step, like gravity had shifted. Her boots barely made a sound on the cracked clay. Kale lowered his head. The arena was now chaos and stillness. No one dared move. The guardians who had trained with Kyle, few who had dared knew what he was capable of. They had seen him rip through body armor, tear open riot shields, drag men from burning wreckage, and from dark corners of cities no one talked about. But now he knelt. Slowly, deliberately, Kale's front legs folded. He lowered himself into a bow, like a wolf greeting someone from the past. Ayla stopped in front of him, so small compared to the beast before her, her breath visible in the cold. She reached out and gently, without force or fear, touched the top of Kale's head. The dog closed his eyes. A sound escaped the crowd. Some cried out. Others were silent, hands over mouths, unable to process what they were seeing. No one dared interrupt, not even the elders. Aaron whispered hoarsely, "What the hell is going on?" "She shouldn't be here," someone else muttered. "That girl she's just—" No one had the words, because in that moment, it wasn't just that Ayla had approached Kale. It was that Kale, who hadn't let another soul touch him in 5 years, who had nearly killed the last trainer sent to rehabilitate him, had allowed it, had leaned into her hand like a homesick soldier finding a piece of home. The drums had stopped. The chanting, the ceremony, the expectations, everything had crumbled under the weight of this impossible, unscripted encounter. And then someone, an old man, face lined like tree bark, voice trembling, whispered what many were beginning to think. "She knows him." The crowd turned. "Knows him?" "Look at her eyes," the man said. "And his." Ayla knelt slowly in front of Kyle now, her forehead gently pressing against the dog's brow. She said nothing, just stayed there, silent, still, breathing in time with him. Kale let out a low sound, neither growl nor whine, just something from deep inside, a tremor of memory. And something shifted in the air, like a gate opening. Something older than the bloodline of the tribe or the rituals of ceremony. For those who could feel it, something sacred had just begun. From the back of the arena, a voice long absent and weighted with recognition finally spoke. "That girl, she's my daughter." Heads whipped around. The chief, tall, silent for years about his past, his gaze fixed on the child in the arena. "And Kale," he added, voice nearly cracking. Kale was her mother's partner. And the storm was no longer silent. The silence before impact was worse than the roar of chaos. Kale's paws thudded against the packed earth, a blur of brute muscle and memory. The air seemed to ripple with dread. Elders shouted warnings, their voices too slow for the moment unraveling before them. Mothers shielded their children's eyes. Spectators froze mid-breath. Ayla didn't move. The 12-year-old girl stood barefoot in the middle of the sacred demonstration grounds, dust curling gently around her ankles. Her gaze locked onto the incoming storm of fur and fury, but her eyes deep, unwavering, too calm for a child held, something that shouldn't have been there. Not fear, recognition. Kale closed in, 20 feet, 15. His growl, rosea, guttural snarl that once made insurgents flee in war-torn valleys. He was a legend, soaked in blood and betrayal, now reduced to a beast for show. His ears flattened, his body coiled to strike. Ayla tilted her head. Then she whispered, one word, almost too soft to hear. "Stay." A forgotten command, not just in Germantha military dialect, but in a tone buried with time, shaped by warmth, not force. Kale skidded to a halt. Dust exploded around his paws. A low growl rumbled in his chest butt. It trembled. His body shook, not with rage, but with something older. His ears perked, nose twitching. The massive shepherd stood still, chest heaving. Then, slowly, he lowered himself. First the front paws, then the hind. He sat. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Ayla stepped closer. Kale didn't flinch. Instead, he did something no one had ever seen since his return from the field. He whined softly, then pressed his scarred muzzle into her open palm. A shiver passed through the onlookers. "He obeyed," someone whispered. "No one has ever." Not even Dagon. All eyes turned to the man seated at the highest tier of the viewing platform, Chief Dagon. The tribal leader's face was stone, but his hand trembled slightly as it clutched the armrest of his chair. His gaze bore into the girl not with anger, not with pride, but with something tangled and fragile. Recognition, guilt, and something that had no name. Ayla kept her palm on Kale's head, her fingers tracing the line where a shrapnel scar met a healed bullet wound. Her voice barely rose above a breath. "You remember her, don't you?" Kale's tail moved once in a slow sweep. She looked up, eyes finding Dagon. For a second, the crowd didn't matter. The cameras, the whispers, the ceremonial purpose of the day. There was only the girl, and the man who had walked away before she was ever born. Dagon's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes searched those same eyes, the shape of her face, the slope of her nose, her stillness. She wasn't just the daughter of the woman he had once loved. She was her, alive, standing, and somehow, standing there like she belonged. Elder Juno took a half-step forward. "Chief Dagon, what is the meaning of this? How does a child tame the untamable?" But Dagon didn't answer. Instead, it was Elder Rika older, quieter, her sight half-faded, who stepped from the circle. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of years. "That is no ordinary girl." She gestured toward Ayla. "She bears the voice of memory, of someone Kale knew in war." Dagon's throat tightened. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. "She is my blood." The arena, once tense with danger, was now silent with revelation. Ayla looked around, not triumphant, not defiant, just present, just there. "I didn't come to make a scene," she said, her voice steady. "I only wanted to see the dog they called Unbreakable, the one who served with her, with my mother. She talked about him every night when the pain got worse." Her words sliced clean. Dagon flinched as if struck. Kale leaned into Ayla's side, shielding her slightly, as if recognizing the weight of what was unfolding. "She passed away last week," Ayla continued, her fingers buried in the thick fur of Kale's neck. "But before she did, she whispered your name. Said you once made a promise you couldn't keep. Said one day I'd understand." The elders exchanged uncertain looks. Dagon stood. His ceremonial robes rustled, the beads clinking softly like wind chimes in a forgotten home. I thought it was the only way," he said. "To protect the tribe, to serve something greater than myself. I didn't know she carried." "She knew you'd choose them," Ayla cut in. "Not with anger, with fact. She just didn't think you'd forget us completely." The truth fell like ash. And then, the unexpected. Kale barked. Once. Loud. But not a warning. A call. To remember. To reunite. To rebuild. It startled even Ayla. But in that sound, something shifted. As if the years had cracked open, and the ghost of a battlefield long buried had reached out not for vengeance, but for resolution. Kale turned his eyes to Dagon, holding the stare. There was no aggression there. Only clarity. Loyal Tyre claimed. Redefined. The beast was no longer untethered. He had chosen. And the girl had awakened something that no blood oath, no ceremony, no tribal law could command. The arena wasn't a place of shadows anymore. It had become a place of revelation. And the war not the one fought with bullets, but the one waged in silence, in absence, in broken promises, had just found its reckoning. The smell of smoke and antiseptic clung to the wind that swept through the field hospital like a ghost with unfinished business. Flaps of the olive-green medical tent rattled against their poles. Outside, distant gunfire echoed, a reminder that peace was only ever borrowed, never earned. Inside, Serena knelt over a wounded soldier, her gloved hands slick with blood. Her eyes sharp, unflinching, moved between the man's face and the torn flesh of his side. She whispered reassurances to him in a language he barely understood, but her voice low, calm, certain carried more medicine than any syringe could. At her feet lay Kale, younger then, his coat unmarred by scars, eyes bright with purpose. The German shepherd didn't flinch at the chaos. His head rested against Serena's boot, breathing in sync with hers. He had already pulled the man from the kill zone. Now he watched, unmoving, as she fought to keep him alive. Then Dagan entered tall, lean, his tribal tattoo barely hidden beneath his blood-spattered fatigues. He stood in the doorway of the tent, chest rising fast, gaze frozen not on the dying man, but on Serena. "That was suicide," he said quietly. "Going that far into the valley, you could have been killed." Serena didn't look up. "So could he," she answered, stitching flesh like she was repairing torn fabric from home. Dagan stepped closer, jaw tight. "You're not a soldier. You don't have to. I'm a medic," she cut him off. "And he's breathing, isn't he?" Cale let out a low, almost approving breath. Dagan crouched beside her, his voice lowering. "You scare me sometimes." Serena finally looked at him. And for a moment, war didn't exist. There were no tribes, no succession lines, just two people scorched by duty and drawn by something neither could name. Later that night, Serena sat on an overturned crate beside the campfire, her arms draped over Cale's shoulders. He didn't mind. He leaned into her like a child would, like he knew the weight she carried and wanted to borrow some of it. Her fatigues were stained. Her hair smelled of sweat and smoke, but her eyes, they were softer now, gazing at the flames like they held all the memories she couldn't say aloud. Dagan walked up quietly, holding a canteen. "For you." She took it, nodding. "I saw the report," he said, easing onto the crate beside her. "They're saying Cale dragged that man over 400 meters. "He did," Serena murmured. "But he kept looking back at me, like he wasn't sure it was worth it if I didn't make it too." Dagan looked at Cale. "He's never bonded like that with anyone else." Serena smiled, a tired one. "Maybe he's just tired of losing things." They sat in silence for a long time, just the crackle of wood and the rhythmic breath of a resting war dog. Then Dagan reached into his pocket and pulled out a char medal, circular, etched with tribal symbols. He pressed it into her palm. "This was my mother's," he said, "and her mother's before her. When I return, I'll need to choose. They've asked me to come back. Take the oath. Lead." Serena's smile faded. "So this is goodbye." He looked down. "I don't want it to be, but it will be." Her voice was steady, but Cale stirred, sensing the shift. Serena closed her fingers over the charm and stood. "You want to honor your ancestors. I want to save the ones still breathing. Those are different kinds of wars, Dagan." He stood too close now. "If things were different." "They're not." She kissed him then, soft, final. The kind of kiss that says, "I forgive you," for the ending before it even begins. Cale rose beside them, ears perked, sensing something invisible pass between them. 3 months later, Serena was alone in a hospital in the city. The war had moved elsewhere. So had Dagan. She wore a loose coat, a nurse's ID, and a secret. Her hands now shook, not from fear, but from a heartbeat she could feel under her ribs new, fragile, hers. Cale stayed with her through the pregnancy. The army had retired him early after he lost part of his hearing in an explosion. But he never lost his loyalty. He lay beside Serena's cot at night, his body curved like a guardian around her swelling belly. When Ayla was born, Cale was the first to nuzzle her, gentle as rain, the years of war melting from his body like old armor finally laid down. Serena wrote to Dagan. Once. A short letter. No anger, no begging, just the truth. Her name is Ayla. She has your eyes but not your silence. If you ever want to know her, we'll be in Willowbend. There was no reply. So Serena erased him from stories, from photos, from bedtime whispers. She told Ayla her father had died during the war. Sometimes, it was easier to believe in a clean absence than to live with a presence that chose not to return. But Cale never forgot. Even when Serena grew pale, her breath shorter, her touch lighter. Even when the doctors said the cancer was a fire they couldn't put out, Cale would still sit at the edge of her bed, eyes fixed on the door, waiting for a man who'd made a different choice. The woman who was erased still whispered his name in sleep, and the daughter, who didn't know him yet, would one day call a command that only someone with his blood could give. The ticking of the oxygen monitor was the only sound in the room, a slow and steady metronome counting down what time could not give back. Serena lay propped against a faded hospital pillow, her once strong shoulders now reduced to fragile lines beneath a cotton blanket. The light filtering through the half-closed blinds painted her face in slanted bands of gold and gray sunlight and shadow wrestling for space, much like the war within her body. Ayla sat beside her mother, legs folded, silent, 12 years old, but with a stillness far beyond her age, as if she'd been carrying more than just schoolbooks and childhood dreams. She traced the pattern of her jeans distractedly until Serena reached over with a trembling hand, brushing a curl from her daughter's brow. "Do you remember the dream you used to have about the jungle?" Serena's voice was gravel, soft, lungs straining even for this small effort. Ayla nodded. "The one with the dog who always finds the way home." Serena smiled, eyes shining not just from pain, but memory. "That wasn't a dream. That was Kale." The girl blinked. "The real Kyle?" Serena looked toward the foot of the hospital bed, where an old, worn photo frame leaned against the edge of the table. In it, 3 figures stood against the backdrop of a battlefield sunset Serena in military fatigues, one arm around a broad-shouldered man with tribal markings on his face, and between them, a sharp-eyed German shepherd sitting at attention, Kyle. Younger, fierce, whole. "He saved more lives than any of us," Serena whispered, "including mine. And once, I thought he might help save your father from himself." Ayla's brow furrowed. She had heard mentions of him before Dagon, the tribal leader, a ghost of sorts, always spoken about in unfinished sentences and silent stares. Serena turned with effort, reaching into the drawer beside her bed. Her hand emerged, holding a small tin box, chipped on the corners, paint worn to reveal rust. She handed it to Ayla. The girl opened it carefully. Inside, nestled in a folded cloth, was a locket of smooth, silver oval marked with faint scratches and Time's soft fingerprints. Ayla opened the locket. Inside, on one side, was a photo her, mother younger, radiant, holding a newborn swaddled in a khaki sling. On the other side, 2 dog tags clinked together quietly, as if speaking in code. One tag read, KL9 Unit, 3 blood type O+. The other SGT, Serena Lyell, combat medic, do not separate. Beneath the tags lay a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges, addressed in cursive. "To Dagon if there is still anything left of him." Ayla looked up. "You want me to give this to him?" Serena's face tightened, as if she were bracing herself against more than physical pain. "Yes. And return Kale. But he's wild. Dangerous. They said he was retired because he couldn't be trusted anymore." Serena's voice was firmer now, deeper than Ayla had heard it in weeks. "He wasn't retired. He was silenced." A moment passed, and then Serena's voice cracked not from sickness, but emotion. "They called him a weapon, but he was more human than some of the men I served with. And Dagon, he was so afraid of what Kale remembered that he exiled him, stripped him of his rank, called him unfit." She paused to catch her breath, every inhale a struggle. "But Kale doesn't forget. And neither should you. That dog is family, Ayla. You grew up on stories of wolves, of guardians, of creatures that remember who you are even when the world wants to erase you." Ayla's fingers tightened around the locket. "I can't go back to that place," Serena said quietly. "They would never allow it. But you're still a child in their eyes. And sometimes, children are allowed where ghosts are not." Ayla blinked away tears. "Will he remember me?" Serena smiled faintly. "He already did." Silence fell again, broken only by the whir of the IV machine and the low hum of a world outside that didn't know a goodbye was beginning. Serena reached out and took Ayla's hand. "This isn't just about Kale. This is about truth. About finishing something I wasn't allowed to." "I'm scared," Ayla whispered. "I was too," her mother said. "The day I found out I was pregnant with you. The night the sky lit up with mortar fire and Kale shielded me with his own body. I was terrified. But sometimes, fear is what tells us where to go." Ayla leaned forward, resting her forehead against her mother's chest. The locket clinked softly between them, caught in the quiet gravity of parting. Later that night, as Ayla stood on the porch beneath the sky scattered with stars, she held the tin box against her chest. The wind curled around her like a whispered promise, and somewhere, in the distance, a lone howl broke the night voice. Not quite wolf, not quite dog, but something older. She didn't know yet how far the road would take her, or what it would ask of her heart. But she knew the path had already begun, not because of blood or command or duty, but because someone had trusted her with the truth. The silence inside the chieftain's tent was suffocating. Only the low hiss of burning incense broke it, a smoky spiral dancing in the stale air, curling like a warning around the ornate weapons that lined the walls. Outside, drums thudded distant echoes of ritual, of tradition. Inside, tension built like a fault line before the quake. Chief Dagon stood still, hands behind his back, his face a chiseled sculpture of control, his eyes dark as charred earth watched the girl who had upended everything. Ayla sat cross-legged on the woven rug, unflinching, her spine straight despite the weight of the moment. Her hands rested calmly on her knees. Kale lay beside her, his head nestled close to her leg, as if guarding her even now. "Who taught you those words?" Dagon asked, voice low, measured, too calm. Ayla didn't blink. "What words?" "The command. The dialect," he pressed, stepping closer. "You said freighter packs. That protocol hasn't been used since the final siege at Karas Ridge. It's classified, military only. Where did you hear it?" She met his gaze, her silence sharp as a blade. There was no fear in her, no apology, only that quiet, unwavering intensity that reminded him of someone he had not dared speak of in over a decade. Serena. Dagon's jaw tightened. He knelt down, slow and deliberate, until their eyes were level. "Who are you?" he asked, softer now, but not out of kindness. It was suspicion laced with an old guilt, the kind that never quite healed. "You know who I am," Ayla said, and the words dropped like stones. He inhaled sharply, something flickering behind his composure. "You carry her face," he muttered. "But that doesn't mean you understand her world." "I understand enough," she replied. "She told me about you, about what you left behind." Dagon stood abruptly. The flap of the tent swayed from the force of his movement. "You come here uninvited. You step into a sacred arena meant for warriors. You utter commands that haven't been heard in 15 years. And now, the dog Kale, who has never obeyed another since there were answers only to you. A beat. Who are you really, Ayla?" She rose slowly, Kale mimicking her, standing guard at her side like a shadow. She took a step forward, close enough that he could see the shimmer of her mother's eyes in hers. Same sharp stare, same iron resolve wrapped in soft defiance. "I'm the consequence," she said simply, "of everything you chose to forget." The words struck like a slap. Dagon's face, so stoic before the council, now cracked under the pressure of truths too long buried. He turned away, pacing. "I gave your mother a way out," he said quietly. "A future. One without war, without blood." "No," Ayla corrected. "You gave yourself a way forward. You left her behind." Kale saw it. He never forgot. Outside the tent, faint whispers were rising, elders murmuring, children retelling what they saw in the arena. Word of the girl who calmed the warhound, of the ancient dialect brought back to life. The tribal ground was shifting beneath Dagon's feet, and he knew it. "You've stirred dangerous memories," he said, turning back to her. "This village, this tribe we do not survive by living in the past." "Maybe not," she said, pulling something from her bag. A small locket, brass, worn, etched with scratches from long years of travel. She held it out. "But the past remembers you." Dagon took it with hesitation, flipping it open. Inside, 2 military dog tags and a folded paper, yellowed at the edges. Serena's handwriting, his chest constricted as he read the name etched on the tags. KL 1000, 100, and 29X. S. Marion. Medic. Unit. He closed the locket, the metal cool and heavy in his palm. "She sent you here?" Ayla nodded. "To return Kale to where he belongs." Dagon stared at the dog, who did not growl, who did not flinch. Kale merely watched him, alert, steady, as though measuring the man he once followed into fire. And now, as if waiting for him to speak a truth long overdue. "I don't know if he belongs here anymore," Dagon murmured. That's not for you to decide, Ayla said. Not anymore. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Dagan leaned in, a flicker of something harder returning to his face. Tell me honestly, he said. Did Serena train you to control Kale? Or are you something more? I'm her daughter, Ayla said, voice low. That's enough. Outside, the tribal fires cracked. Inside, the air had shifted. This girl, this child with war commands in her blood and a combat dog at her side was no longer just an intruder. She was a question the village had no answer for, and a challenge Dagan could no longer ignore. As Ayla turned to leave, Kale followed. But before she stepped past the tent's threshold, Dagan spoke once more quietly, but with the gravity of a man watching the old world tip into the new. She had fire in her, your mother. It scared me once. Now I see it again. Ayla paused just for a breath, then said over her shoulder, then be scared again. And she was gone. Behind her, the chief of the tribe remained still in his tent of smoke and silence, gripping a locket from a life he once buried, and now, perhaps, could no longer outrun. Kale wasn't the same anymore. Not since the girl. It started the morning after the arena incident. A tray of food goat meat and boiled rice had been placed near his enclosure, still steaming, still warm. But he hadn't touched it. By midday, the flies came. The trainer, a boy no older than 17, approached cautiously with a stick, poking at the untouched meal. He's not sick, the boy muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. He's just waiting. Kale sat motionless under the tamarind tree, muscles coiled beneath his dark coat, ears twitching at every footstep, but his gaze was locked on the edge of the village, where Ayla had disappeared the day before. When she finally returned, barefoot in dust streaked from helping the healer grind herbs, the wind shifted. Kale stood, without a sound, and padded over to the fence. He didn't bark. He didn't growl. He simply waited, head lowered not in submission, but recognition. Ayla paused mid-step, clutching the small pouch of crushed turmeric and sal leaves in her palm. Her eyes met his, and something passed between them. Not memory, at least not hers, but something older, deeper, the kind of understanding that doesn't come from words. Kale ate for the first time that evening, and from that day forward, it was only when Ayla stood within sight that he would touch his food. Without her, he'd pace the perimeter like a soldier awaiting orders. And always, every evening, when the tribal children lit the ceremonial fires near the village square, Kale would sighties fixed on the worn photograph that Ayla had tucked into the base of the tree. It was a black and white image, faded by time. A young woman in military fatigues knelt beside a dog, one arm wrapped around its neck. Serena. And Kaleso, much younger, less scarred, but unmistakably him. His ears were perked. His tongue lolled sideways in the early stages of a rare smile. No one but Ayla ever dared place the photo there. But Kale never let anyone touch it after that, not even the elders. Children began to notice first. I think he listens to her thoughts, whispered Miko, a boy of 8, as he crept up beside KL, holding out a roasted peanut with trembling fingers. He doesn't even growl anymore. Kale sniffed the boy's hand, took the offering gently between his teeth, then lay down at his feet, as if keeping watch. The elders watched from a distance, uncertain whether to be concerned or awed. One night, under the wide bowl of stars, Ayla sat cross-legged beside the tree, stroking the brittle edge of Serena's photo. "Do you remember her?" she asked softly, not expecting a reply. Kale, lying beside her, blinked slowly. Then, to her astonishment, he nosed toward the image, sniffed it once, and let out the faintest of whines. Not a cry of pain, but of yearning. "Is it possible you still remember my mom?" she whispered. The fire crackled beside them, casting long shadows on the dirt. KL leaned into her shoulder, pressing his weight against her arm like a heartbeat tone that had waited far too long. That night, Ayla dreamt of the desert. She saw her mother in a field tent, treating a wounded man whose face she could not see. Kyle lay beside them, panting, his side grazed by shrapnel. There was blood hers, his, someone's butt. Serena's hands remained steady. She whispered words in a code Ayla couldn't understand, and Kale calmed, eyelids fluttering in pain. Then the image blurred and the voice that replaced it was Kale's. Not barking, not snarling, but speaking. "Ayla," he said with Serena's voice. Ayla awoke with tears staining her cheeks. The next morning, she found Kyle circling the tree restlessly, pawing at the earth where the photograph had been buried the day before by the wind. His whimpers were low, almost like mourning. She knelt beside him, brushing dust off the image, and noticed something strange. The ink behind the photo was smudged, like it had once been part of a letter. Ayla's heart raced. She reached into her satchel and retrieved the sealed envelope her mother had given her before she passed. She hadn't yet opened it, too afraid of the goodbye. But now, something about the way Kale waited, still as stone, made her hands tremble. She cracked the seal. Inside was a letter, but more than that, dog tags. Scratched, dented. The chain was broken, rusted by time. She turned the tags over and gasped. KL, Unit 72. Then the second, Serena L. Mora, CMED, 380 seconds. It was real. Everything her mother said, every story, every night she'd laid beside her hospital bed listening to tales of war, of love, of a dog who saved lives in silence, was real. Kale inched closer, slowly, carefully, as if seeking permission. And then, without warning, he rested his head on Ayla's lap. From the shadows, the tribal healer, old enough to remember the war years, stood with his staff pressed into the ground. "He's remembering," the man said. "Not like we do, not through thoughts, through scent, touch, echoes of pain and love." Ayla looked up, tears still clinging to her lashes. "Is that even possible?" The old man nodded. "Dogs don't forget the way humans do. They remember the ones who bled beside them, who whispered through the dust and gunfire. Your mother was more than a medic to him. She was home." For the first time since her arrival, the village seemed to breathe a little differently around her. Children no longer ran from Kale. They brought him offerings bracelets made of reeds, feathers, tiny pieces of smoked fish. He accepted each gift like a ritual, and at the center of it all, the photo beneath the tree remained untouched, guarded not by orders or fences, but by something far more sacred: memory. The kind that lingers not in the mind, but in the soul. The fire inside the great lodge burned low, reduced to a ring of embers that crackled like secrets long buried. Around it sat the council of eldersmen and women wrapped in ceremonial pelts, eyes clouded by age but sharpened by decades of watching power devour lineage. Chief Dagan stood before them like a boy again, not a warrior, not a leader. Just a man judged by those who knew what he once ran from. Elder Nyoma was the first to speak. Her voice was like woven bark dry, but unbreakable. "You called her a ghost," she said, staring at Dagan without blinking. "But she walked into our arena. She called the dog, and the dog listened." "She's just a girl," Dagan replied, though even he didn't believe it anymore. "Serena's daughter. Nothing more. Serena's daughter," Elder Jorik muttered, tapping his cane once against the stone floor. "The same Serena you never spoke of again. The same one who bled beside you in the Red Valley and disappeared when your name was called for succession. Do not pretend this is coincidence." Dagan's jaw locked, breath shallow. Elder Nyoma leaned forward. "The tribe watched, as Kael the beast we kept chained longer than any tradition demanded, obeyed a child with no rank, no place here. A dog who once tore men apart at your command now lays his head in her lap. This is not chance. This is the past, risen in the form of flesh and defiance." A hush hung in the room like fog. Jorik's fingers curled around his cane like he was gripping time itself. "We warned you 13 winters ago. That love with an outsider would bring fractures to the stone of leadership. You said you understood the cost." "I paid it," Dagan said quietly. "No," Nyoma answered. "You deferred it." For a moment, only the wind outside spoke, crawling beneath the lodge doors like an unwelcome memory. "She carries your blood," Jorik said, rising with the slow dignity of old warriors. "And now, every elder, every child, every mother who watched the arena whispers the same thing. He has a daughter. And, more dangerously, she commands KL. That dog was our weapon, our warning to the outside world. If she turns him, who do we become?" Dagan swallowed. eyes narrowing. She doesn't understand what she's tampering with. Naoma shook her head. You don't understand what's unraveling. Jorik stepped closer. The council must now ask, will you protect your lineage or preserve your leadership? Because soon you will not be allowed both. Dagon stiffened. Are you giving me an ultimatum? We're giving you a truth, Naoma said, rising beside Jorik. The girl is not just a shadow of your past. She is a torch, and torches burn or reveal. Just as they turned to leave, Jorik paused. And Dagon, something else stirs. The casino developers have returned. They've begun offering contracts to families outside the bloodline, sowing division. Your silence about Ayla only adds fuel. This isn't just personal anymore. It's strategic. Dagon stood alone as the elders left each footstep echoing like the beat of a war drum. He remained still until the final pelted figure crossed the threshold. Only then did he speak to no one. She wasn't supposed to come back. Outside the lodge, dusk bloomed over the cliffs in muted gold. Ayla sat cross-legged on the red earth, tracing her mother's initials in the dust with a twig. Kael lay beside her, his body curved protectively around her small frame, amber eyes tracking every flutter of wind. She didn't know the words that had just been exchanged, but she could feel them in the wind-shifting, cutting, cold. From the shadows, eyes watched. Not Kael's, not Dagon's, the kind of eyes that come with ledgers, contracts, and cranes, developers. Later that night, as torchlights flickered across the compound, an envelope appeared beneath Dagon's lodge door, unmarked. Tucked inside, an aerial photo of tribal land, with bulldozers circled in red ink. A post-it note stuck to the back. You delay, they divide. The land is losing patience. P. The rain had passed by the time Ayla wandered back toward the edge of the training grounds. The earth still held the memory of it soft beneath her sneakers, the air tinged with petrichor and something older, something buried. Kael padded silently beside her, ever watchful, as if each step she took carried more meaning than even she could understand. They had returned to the grounds not for training, but for the ghosts. The old equipment shed stood crooked, half swallowed by time and rust. Vines coiled through the broken window pane like fingers trying to reclaim what once belonged to the wild. A tribal worker had left it unlocked by accident, or maybe not. Maybe fate had its own keys. Kael halted at the threshold. His ears flicked back, and he let out a low whimper that startled her, not fear, but recognition. That was when she saw the mark, etched faintly into the door's splintered wood, just above the handle, S. Reyes. Her mother's name. Ayla pushed the door open. The hinges groaned in protest. But inside, the scent of old paper and leather and dust felt like a whisper from another world. Sunlight filtered through the cracks in the roof, spotlighting scattered storage boxes, duffel bags, and relics from a war most people had forgotten, but Kael had not. He walked in slowly, nose to the ground, tail low and sweeping. Then he stopped dead center of the room and placed a paw atop one specific storage box, whimpering again. Ayla knelt beside him. Her fingers trembled as she undid the latch. The lid lifted with a breathless creak. Inside were her mother's things, folded fatigues, a faded red armband, a combat patch. At the bottom, wrapped carefully in oilcloth, was a journal, leather-bound, worn smooth by use. There was a burn mark across the lower right corner, as if it had survived something it wasn't meant to. She opened it. The first page bore her mother's handwriting. To the one who finds this, if you understand these pages, you know what I risked, what we all risked. The ink was bold, slanted with urgency. Some entries were straightforward lists of coordinates, supply schedules, field medical notes, but others were scribbled in shorthand or coded. Names replaced with code names, dates circled and underlined, and drawing screwed sketches of the land around the old forward operating base. Kael leaned in, his muzzle brushing the paper gently. He let out a soft chuff, then sat, eyes locked on her like he was waiting for her to remember something she hadn't lived. Ayla turned the page and there it was, a photograph. Old and faded, but unmistakable. Her mother, Serena, in uniform. Her smile relaxed in a way Ayla had never seen. Her belly round with pregnancy. And beside her, Kael. His tongue out, licking her belly. His eyes not fierce or trained, but tender, protective. On the back of the photo, written in her mother's unmistakable handwriting, Cale knows, he knew before anyone. Ayla blinked back tears. The image pressed into her like heat through the skin confirmation of what she already felt but didn't dare speak aloud. That Cale had known her before she was even born. That his instincts weren't just sharpened by training, they were rooted in blood and memory. She flipped another page. This time she found a map. Hand-drawn. A red circle had been etched over a part of the reservation she didn't recognize, near a series of old bunkers long closed off. Beside the circle, her mother had written, "Where truth sleeps." Kyle growled softly. Ayla looked at him. "Do you remember this place?" she asked, her voice quiet, more breath than sound. Cale didn't move. He simply stared at the map, then back at her, and then back again. That's when she noticed something else in the box, buried beneath an old canteen and wrapped in cloth like a sacred thing. A locket. She opened it. Inside, a picture of Serena and a much younger Dagon, arms around each other in a rare moment of peace. Cheek to cheek, eyes filled with something like hope. And behind the locket, tucked into the inner lining of the journal sealed with wax, was an envelope. Her name was written across it in her mother's handwriting. Ayla. Her fingers trembled. She didn't open it. Not yet. Not here. She slipped the letter into her jacket, the locket into her jeans pocket, and closed the journal, holding it to her chest like an heirloom carved in silence. Outside, the wind stirred again. The trees whispered. Cale stood at attention, as if awaiting new orders, as if something had just shifted. Maybe it had. She looked back at the box one last time before closing it. There were other things in their dog tags, a cracked radio, a blood-stained cloth, but none of them called to her like the journal, the photo, and the map had. As she stepped out into the daylight, Cale stayed close. The sun caught in his eye samber, reflecting amberand for a moment. She thought she saw it again. The same look from the photo, the same silent vow. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Because for the first time since Serena's death, Ayla didn't feel like she was walking alone. She was walking toward something, and Cale was already waiting for her there. The forest wasn't silent at dawn, it whispered. A cold hush pressed against the ferns, and a pale mist coiled low around Ayla's boots as she stepped beyond the tribal path, Cale padding beside her like a shadow stitched from memory. She clutched the old, yellowed map in one hand, fingers tight, like if she let go, the past would vanish with it. Cale had insisted on following her. The moment she'd unrolled the journal's last page, where Serena had sketched a rough terrain and circled one lonely dot in red, Cale had perked up, not just attentive, alert, as if something ancient in him had stirred. Now, with each careful step through the underbrush, Cale moved with uncanny familiarity. His ears twitched with every breeze. His eyes scanned the tree line, not in fear but in recognition. This wasn't just a forest to him. It was something else, a memory, a ruin, a buried echo of training and trauma, of barked orders and gentle hands. Ayla slowed as the ground shifted less, soft moss, more rock. The trees grew gnarled here, older than anything else in the valley, their roots like the fingers of sleeping giants. And then, as the mist broke apart like pulled wool, she saw it. A hill with no summit, just a wide slab of concrete embedded into the slope like a scar. It bore no markings, no signage, just moss-covered steel seams, half swallowed by earth. Nature had tried to forget it, but it was still here. Cale froze, his breath hitched. Then he moved forward slow, deliberate, and pawed at the leaves blanketing the base of the slab. Dirt loosened. A metallic clank rang out like a memory surfacing. Ayla knelt. Her hands found what he had, a rusted wheel bolted into the ground. She stared at him. This is it, isn't it? Kyle didn't bark. He pressed his forehead against the wheel and whined a sound that didn't belong to a dog, but to something remembering what it meant to be used, broken, trained, and trusted. Ayla turned the wheel. It screeched in protest, reluctant to release its hold on the past. But it moved, with effort, with weight. And with it, the slab gave way, groaning open just enough to reveal a dark staircase that sank into the belly of the hill. She stood at its edge, her heart thudding. The bunker exhaled cold, air musty, old, but layered with something else. the faintest trace of antiseptic, rubber, oil, and behind it all, something distinctly human. Serena had been here, and so had Cale. She stepped inside. Each footfall echoed like a question. Cale followed, but slower now. His paws made no sound, but his eyes were scanning everything: walls, shadows, the scattered paper on the ground, the burned-out emergency lights above. Here, in this buried silence, he was different. He wasn't just a dog. He was a witness. They passed rooms with shattered windows, shelves lined with files that time had yellowed and curled, training mats, metal crates, stenciled words still faintly visible: K-9, Tactical Division, Experimental Tier. Ayla reached for the locket around her neck and opened it again. Dog tags. Serena's. She whispered aloud, "What did they do to you here?" Cale stopped in front of a rusted door. It was half open, hinges eaten by time. Inside, a chair remained bolted to the floor, not a normal chair restraint seat. Nearby, a wall of photographs, pinned and curling. Serena in uniform. Serena with KL. One picture showed her pregnant, Cale beside her, muzzle pressed gently to her belly like he knew who was inside. Ayla's throat closed. She stepped closer to the photo wall and traced the corner of one torn image: Serena, writing in a notebook with Kyle beside her, both under the red light of dusk. That same notebook now rested in Ayla's bag. This place had been more than a facility. It had been a bridge between worlds, between war and healing, between a woman and the creatures the world only saw as weapons. Ayla turned to Cale. "You remember her?" He whined again, softer this time. She knelt, touched his muzzle, and felt him lean in, not with fear, with recognition. Behind her, a sound metal shifting. She turned sharply. Nothing moved, but that feeling that someone was watching lingered. "Come on," she whispered, guiding him back into the hallway. They passed a broken mirror, fractured into shards. Ayla glimpsed her own reflection eyes too much like Serena's, jaw clenched in a way that felt inherited. She pressed forward. At the end of the corridor, a vault door stood sealed shut. On it, a handprint scanner long since dead, spray painted in fading red. "Do not open. Termination protocol," in effect. She stepped back, not out of fear but because something in her gut told her the story wasn't finished. This place had answers, but it also had ghosts. Cale moved beside her, his body suddenly tense again. Not fear, guarding, protecting. That was his job, once. She placed her hand on his back. "We'll come back," she promised. Not yet. Outside, dawn had given way to morning light. The forest looked different now, not older, but awake. As they stepped back into the clearing, Ayla glanced one last time at the slab as it slowly closed again, sealing secrets inside. Behind her, Cale turned his head toward the wind ears alert. His eyes fixed on something beyond the trees. Not danger, but memory. The air inside the bunker was stale with the weight of sealed years. Each step Ayla took down the narrow concrete hallway echoed against the silent walls like ghosts breathing behind her. Cale padded close, his steps sure, his body alert not in fear, but recognition, as if his paws remembered the path, even if Ayla did not. At the far end of the hallway, a steel door stood shut. Faded yellow paint along the edges revealed caution warnings. Authorized, personal, only. Beneath it, the unmistakable initials S.R. Serena Rioswer scratched into the rusting metal, barely legible but deliberate. Ayla pressed her fingers to them, a silent prayer passing through her chest. Cale gave a low whimper and sat beside her, his ears pinned back. Inside, dust clung to everything: filing cabinets, empty crates, wires that snaked like veins across control panels. This place wasn't just forgotten. It had been buried, like a secret someone hoped time would erase. And yet, someone once fought to preserve it. A single generator choked awake when she flipped the switch, coughing light into the room like a reluctant confession. Monitors along one wall flickered to life, grainy and glitched time-stamped windows into a past never meant to be seen. Ayla held her breath as the first image loaded. Serena, younger, her face hardened by war but softened by something in her eyes, hope maybe. She wore desert camo, her medic patch worn thin. And there, Trotting beside her with unshakable loyalty was Kale. Smaller then, leaner, his fur unscarred. He moved, like muscle wrapped around instinct. One screen switched to another, feed night vision, chaos. Serena ducking behind a shattered wall, clutching her side. Blood soaked her uniform, a hiss of static. Then Kale appeared again, dragging her by the tactical vest with his teeth, not out of panic but purpose. She tried to push him away once, feebly. He refused. His eyes locked on her, feral and focused. Ayla's throat closed. Another video auto-played. This time, no battlefield. Instead, a cold command center. And sitting before a bank of monitors was a younger Dagon face, grim, jaw clenched. His eyes tracked Serena's every move on the screen. He leaned forward when she fell. His hand balled into a fist as Kale fought to keep her breathing. Then came the moment that rewrote everything Ayla had been told. Dagon exhaled and turned the monitor off. He knew. He knew she'd survived. Ayla reeled, her hand flying to her mouth. Kale, sensing the shift in her energy, came to her side and nudged her knee, pressing his head against her trembling hand. A new file blinked open, a recording not from surveillance, but a personal log. Serena's voice cracked the room open like thunder after stillness. This is Sergeant Serena Rios. Day 173. Kale and I are 3 clicks from evac. I've lost too much blood, but he won't leave me. God, he's dragging me like I'm a sack of flour, and he's made of fury and faith. If someone finds this, if Ayla finds this, tell her I never wanted her raised in shadows. But I couldn't protect her and serve both sides of the war. Dagon. Dagon made his choice. I had to make mine. The screen blurred as Ayla stepped back, her chest tight with grief and fire. Her mother had recorded this not for the war archive, not for command but for her. A goodbye spoken through teeth clenched in pain. A warrior's lullaby to the daughter she wouldn't live to cradle long enough. Kale gave a sudden bark knot, sharp, but intentional, and walked over to a corner unit. He pawed at it once. Ayla followed. Inside was a small, secured safe, its latch rusted but still functional. She opened it with shaky hands. Inside, an old analog tape labeled SR, Personal Recovery Debrief, and a worn photo. The photo nearly shattered her. It was of Serena, seated on the edge of a field cot, her shirt pulled up slightly to reveal her rounded belly. Kale sat next to her, his head resting softly against the swell. He wasn't just guarding her, he was listening. Beneath the photo, a torn sticky note in Serena's handwriting. He knew her heartbeat before she was born. A sob cracked through Ayla's lungs, soundless and deep. She curled her fingers around the tape, pressing it to her chest, as if proximity could rewind time. How many people had tried to silence this truth? How many had turned their backs while Kyle fought, while her mother bled into the soil of foreign lands, believing her daughter would grow up free of legacy's burdens? Behind her, the monitors dimmed, as if giving her privacy. Kale whined gently. He circled once and lay down beside the fallen photo, his chin resting across Serena's image, as though waiting for her command again. Ayla crouched and whispered into his ear, her voice thin but clear. "You didn't fail her. You brought her home. Now it's my turn." He looked up, eyes glassed with something ancient, something not even time had managed to erase, and for a moment, the space between dog and girl vanished. They were just 2 souls stitched by a promise Serena had dared to leave behind. The forest was quiet in the kind of way that didn't feel empty but reverent, as if every pine needle and broken twig knew it was standing witness to something sacred. Ayla knelt in the middle of a mossy clearing where the wind seemed to hush itself. Her fingers grazed the uneven earth beneath the underbrush, a subtle rise, almost nothing. But Kale had stopped cold here, tail low, breath held, as if sensing something he couldn't quite explain. His ears twitched. His gaze flicked toward the roots of an old spruce tree, gnarled and weather-beaten. It stood like a sentinel above a disturbed patch of soil. Ayla brushed away the leaves. And there it was, carved roughly into the exposed wood of a stump, half-eaten by time but still legible. Hope. She froze. It wasn't graffiti. It wasn't accidental. It was a message. A marker. Someone Serena had once stood in this exact spot, hands trembling or determined or both, and carved a word that had carried her through war zones and whispered through lullabies. It was no longer just a word. It was an anchor. Kyle let out a soft whine. "I know," Ayla murmured, placing a hand on his shoulder. His fur was warm beneath her palm, as if his pulse beat in rhythm with hers. "She left something here." She began to dig, carefully, as if the soil might bleed if she was too rough. The loam was rich and damp, crumbling between her fingers. Every scoop pulled her closer to the past. Her heart thudded. This wasn't just an unmarked grave or some forgotten place. It was intentional, hidden, sacred. After several inches, her hand struck something solid. Wood. She gasped quietly and scraped away the remaining dirt. A tin-lined lockbox, old and rust-flecked, lay tucked beneath the roots like a buried heartbeat. Kale sat beside her now, silent and still, his eyes fixed on the box like he already knew what was inside. The clasp resisted. She had to use a stone to pry it open. It clicked. The lid creaked upward, and there it was. Faded papers, plastic sleeves, a tattered journal, a tiny cassette recorder wrapped in cloth, photographs of Serena in uniform, not smiling but shining with purpose. Her hand rested on a younger Kale's neck. Another photo showed Serena heavily pregnant, KL licking her belly gently, as if already pledging his loyalty to the child within. Ayla's throat tightened. She lifted the journal first. Its edges were warped from moisture, the cover still bearing her mother's scribbled initials, SV. The first few pages were notes clinical, methodical, data-heavy. But then it shifted, as if Serena had abandoned protocol and written with her heart. Empathy is not a trick. It's not trained, it's remembered. Dogs don't learn loyalty. They already know it. All we do is build the bridge. Kale knows when I'm afraid before I do. He stops breathing when I do. His heartbeat matches mine at rest. And when I cry, he doesn't bark, he waits. He understands. If anything happens to me, I hope someone remembers that this wasn't about control. It was about trust. Ayla blinked against the burn in her eyes. She'd always wondered what her mother had truly believed, what she'd fought for beneath the heavy military medals and hard-edged silence. This was it. A map, not of places, but of belief. She turned the pages faster now, the wind gently stirring the edges as if guiding her. Charts. Electrocardiogram readings. Brainwave overlaps between humans and dogs during emotional stress. Notations scribbled with urgency. Test 3 successful shared REM disruption between handler and K9. Pages that would have been dismissed as pseudoscience by any military contractor but here. In the soft cradle of this hidden mound, they made sense. KL inched closer and rested his head on her knee. His eyes weren't on the journal. They were on her. "I think you always knew she'd come back for you," Ayla whispered. KL exhaled a warm breath, as if in agreement. And then he nudged the bottom of the box gently with his snout. There was one more item, a black leather pouch tied with an old cord. Ayla untied it with trembling fingers and spilled the contents onto her lap. 2 silver pendants small, dull with age, each one shaped like a half moon. She gasped. Bond tags. K9 military bonding tags, used in only one division of the Army, and only when the connection between dog and handler exceeded the typical command relationship. They were rare, almost mythic. One tag would stay with the handler. The other was fused into the dog's vest at all times. Serena had carried both halves. Ayla looked at KL, and KL whimpered. His head dropped into her lap, gently nosing one of the tags until it spun and caught the glint of sun through the leaves. "You never stopped waiting for her," Ayla said, voice cracking. "You still look for her every time the wind moves." She bent forward, wrapped both arms around him, held him like a child might a fading photograph. Kyle didn't move, but he leaned into her slowly, deliberately until his chest pressed to hers and his heartbeat became the rhythm of the forest around them. There were no explosions here, no gunshots, just the quiet breath of something lost finally being found. They stayed like that for what felt like hours. 2 souls orphaned by war, anchored now by each other. The breeze shifted. Ayla closed the box gently and reburied it only this time with care, with reverence. As she smoothed the soil, she left the carving uncovered. Hope deserved to breathe. Kale sat upright now, ears alert, as if ready. Ayla looked at him and nodded, tears still glistening. "We go back. But not as we were. we go back with the truth. And Kale brave, silent, Kale wagged his tail once, slow and sure, like an oath. They arrived just after the rain 3 dark SUVs that didn't belong, the kind that made people lower their voices when they passed. Tires crackled over gravel roads, still slick with yesterday's storm, mud splashing against the hem of perfectly pressed slacks. The men stepped out like they owned the sky. Sunglasses, even as the clouds hung low. Suits too tight for the wind, too clean for this land. They didn't smell of pine or smoke or dust. They smelled like hotels and arrogance. One of them lit a cigar the moment his patent leather shoe touched the earth. The smoke curled upward like a flag. He scanned the horizon, unimpressed. "Let's get this over with," he muttered. Ayla saw them from a distance, crouched beside Kale behind a row of red willows. She watched their movements like a hawk, heart ticking faster than she wanted it to. Kale didn't bark. He just stared, ears tilted slightly forward. The low rattle in his throat, betraying a memory something about those men, set him off. Down by the community lodge, Dagan stood on the steps with arms folded. His posture was straight, stiff, like a young warrior about to face a trial. But there was something else behind his eyes. A flicker, a tremor he couldn't hide. He knew them. Chairman Red Crow. The tallest man said with a practiced smile as he approached, "Or do you prefer Dagan?" His voice was smooth, sharp, like a knife wrapped in velvet. "I know why you're here," Dagan replied. The third man, short and balding with a crooked toothpick hanging from his lips, chuckled. "Well, then you know this land could be something more. No more dirt roads, no more rusted trailers, a resort, a golf course, schools fully funded, jobs, casinos change everything." "They always do," Dagan said, his tone unreadable. Inside the lodge, a few tribal council members were already gathered. Most were older. Some wore suits, trying to mirror the outsiders. Others wore traditional shawls or beadwork over their shoulders, a quiet defiance. The room felt tight, thick with the scent of coffee and something else, greed, or maybe fear. The men laid out blueprints and mock-ups on the table, a casino that stretched over the valley, flashing lights, helicopter pads, a gated neighborhood. They called it modernization. They called it opportunity. They did not once use the word sacred. Ayla slipped in through the back, unnoticed, her hoodie pulled over her head. Kale waited outside like a shadow. She stood near the old wood stove, close enough to listen, far enough to disappear if needed. "Our people are struggling," said Marla, a council member who had once marched with Serena during land protests. "But do we really think neon lights and cheap liquor will save us?" "You're not thinking big enough," one of the suits countered. "This isn't about liquor and slot machines. This is about future-proofing, partnerships, branding. Hell, we can name one of the lounges after your tribe." A few chuckled nervously. Others shifted in their chairs. Then Dagan spoke. "What are you offering?" The bald man grinned and slid a folder toward him. Inside, figures. Zeros with more zeros. Land usage rights. Clauses buried in legal thorns. "There's a signing bonus," he added. "Enough to rebuild your roads, your schools. Bring in internet even. Your daughter could go to Stanford if you wanted." The room fell silent. Ayla's breath hitched. Stanford. He said it like it was a carrot dangling on a string, not a name her mother whispered on cold nights when dreaming of Ayla's future back, when Serena still believed in choices. Dagan's jaw tightened. His eyes flicked up at the mention of his daughter, though no one had dared speak of Ayla since Serena's death. Still, the guilt painted itself across his face like ash. "This land isn't for sale," Dagan finally said, voice low but resolute. The tallest man leaned forward. "Then lease it. Just a few decades. You still own it, technically. We just manage it. Think about what you could do with that revenue." And then, one by one, the pressure began to build. Council members shifted. Tomaz, the oldest of them all, cleared his throat. "We need resources, Dagan. My nephew left because he couldn't find work here. My son's house leaks in 5 places. The roof on the clinic is rotting. Culture won't feed the children," said another. "But if we lose the land, what do we become?" Marla whispered. They were no longer arguing. They were unraveling. Ayla stepped back, heart pounding. She looked at Dagan. He was still holding the folder, still not speaking. Something in her cracked. She left before she screamed. Outside, Kyle was waiting at the base of the stone steps, tail still, eyes sharp. She dropped to her knees beside him, fingers digging into his fur like he was the only thing holding her to the earth. "He's going to sign," she whispered, choking back a sob. "He's going to trade everything just to feel like he's fixing what he broke." Cale pressed his muzzle into her neck and let out a low, mournful breath. It sounded almost human. In the distance, the men shook hands with some of the council members. Laughter drifted on the wind. Dagan stood alone, folder still unopened, like a man caught in the middle of a battlefield without a weapon. Ayla looked up at the mountains, the old ones, the quiet ones that had watched for centuries without blinking. She thought of Serena, of the war diary buried beneath the bunker, of the map circled in red, of Cale licking her mother's pregnant belly like he already knew Ayla was coming. This land remembered, and if no one else would fight for it, she would. The scream tore from Ayla's throat before she even realized it. 1 second she was dropping Cale's favorite ball outside the cabin near the training circle. The next that was down, legs twitching, frothing at the mouth. His body convulsed once, twice, then stilled in a terrifying arch, his massive frame racked with spasms that didn't stop. "No, no, 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 Kyle." She dropped to her knees, the scent of cedar wood and bile hitting her all at once. His tongue lolled, his eyes half-rolled, but somewhere in their gold-dark depths was a flicker of pain and trust. He whimpered once, barely audible, but enough to tear her heart. She hadn't screamed like that since her mother died. Her hands shook as she pulled Cale's head into her lap, already scanning for injuries. None. But then she saw the traces bits of dark meat on the soil, scattered near his feeding bowl. Not from her. It reeked of something metallic, chemical, wrong. Poison. Her mind raced. Think like Serena. Act like Serena. Emergency protocol. Her mother's notes. The journal. That one page with shaky handwriting, field detoxification. Tier 1 K9 ingestion. She forced herself to remember. 1. Induce vomiting. 2. Activated charcoal slurry. 3. Cold water compressed to slow absorption. Cale let out a guttural cry. "Ayla!" Someone shouted in the distance, but she tuned it out. There wasn't time. She darted into the cabin, knocking over a shelf of supplies. Herbal salves, bandages, a zip bag of burnt wood fragments charcoal. She grabbed it, and a bottle of clean water, stirred both into a black paste in an old mixing bowl, barely blending it before running back to Cale. "Buddy, you have to take this. Come on. You've done worse for me. She knelt beside him, coaxing the thick mixture into his mouth with trembling fingers. He gagged, choked, his breathing ragged. But something in him responded to her voice. "Stay with me," she whispered, brushing the foam from his muzzle. "Don't leave me. You don't get to leave me too." He swallowed. A little at first, then more. Minutes crawled by like hours. His body shuddered, then slumped. She rolled him gently, applying cool compresses along his ribs, his paws, his chest, everything Serena once showed her in that now precious journal. It was all she had. That and hope. When his breathing evened, shallow but steady, Ayla sat back, arms streaked with charcoal, tears drying on her cheeks. Around them, the forest seemed to hold its breath. By the time Chief Dagan arrived, flanked by 2 council elders, Ayla was wiping Cale's mouth and whispering softly into his ear. "She saved him," someone said behind them. She used one of Serena's methods. The chief looked down at the still recovering doggy's daughter's protector, her legacy. For the briefest second, his mask cracked. "You're sure it was poison?" he asked. Ayla didn't even look up. "There were meat scraps laced with something he didn't touch food from me all morning. Someone left it nearby. This was targeted." His voice lowered. "Outsiders? Or someone trying to make it look that way," she said coldly. A heavy silence fell. One of the elders muttered, "A threat to the dog is a threat to the line." Whispers had already begun to slither through the village. Some suspected the casino men, others a tribal power play. Cale had grown to be a symbol of Serena's memory, of Ayla's strength, and perhaps most dangerously, of the unspoken bloodline between her and Dagan. Someone wanted him out of the picture. "He was pacing near the council house yesterday," a young boy said quietly. "Maybe someone thought he knew something." Ayla rose slowly, brushing dirt from her knees. Cale remained curled on the blanket, eyes watching her, still too weak to move, but alive, "This isn't just about land anymore," she said, facing the elders. "This is about fear. Someone's afraid of what he remembers." Dagon's gaze flicked to Kale, then to her. "Or who?" She didn't flinch. They knew. Everyone knew Whispers had turned to thunder. She wasn't just the daughter of a medic. She was his daughter. And in Kale's memory might lie proof no one wanted exposed. Someone had made a move, and next time, it might not be aimed at Kale. Ayla turned and lifted the unconscious dog into her arms, not with ease, but with the kind of strength born of desperation and love. Her legs nearly buckled, but she didn't stop. "He's not dying on this land, not for politics." The crowd parted. As she walked past, one of the elders placed a weathered hand on Dagon's shoulder and whispered, "You can't sit on both thrones, brother. Not when blood is already on the ground." And, for the first time in years, Dagon felt what Serena once called the cold of being known. Back in her cabin, Ayla settled Kyle on a padded bed, dimmed the lights, and sat beside him, stroking his fur as he drifted into fitful sleep. She placed a hand over his chest, still rising, still fighting. "Someone tried to erase you," she murmured, "like they did to her." But Kyle, even in weakness, let out a soft huff and nudged his snout toward the box under her bed. She followed his gaze. The journal, the pages she'd only skimmed. Now she would read them all. The air inside the longhouse was thicker than the smoke spiraling from the ceremonial fire pit. Elders sat in a half-circle of weathered wood, their expressions unreadable, save for the silent weight pressing behind their eyes. Age had carved valleys into their faces, but tonight it was the weight of memory and compromise that made them look older than they truly were. Ayla remained outside the gathering, perched in the shadow of a pine just beyond the firelight's reach. Her arms were folded across her chest, breath slow and quiet. Kael lay beside her, body still, eyes alert. The wound from the poisoning had begun to fade, but he stayed closer to her, now closer than ever. She heard the murmur first, then the rustle of papers. The vote was beginning. Inside, Dagon stood at the center of the circle, the flickering flames brushing his silhouette with strokes of orange and sorrow. His back was straight, but Ayla could sense it, the tremor behind the mask. She could see it in the way his hands clutched each other behind his back, as if tethering himself to resolve. "This isn't about me," he had told Ayla the night before, voice barely louder than the wind. "It's about whether they still believe in what we once stood for." But she knew better. This was about betrayal, both past and present. The voting was silent, a slip of bark for yes, smooth as a river stone, a charred fragment of coal for no, hidden in the palm until dropped into the ceremonial bowl. No debate, no arguments. Just the weight of silence deciding the future of a man who had once carried the tribe through fire and famine. One by one, the elders approached the center. Most walked slowly, leaning on canes carved with ancestral symbols. Others moved with haste, as if eager to cast the burden off their shoulders. Ayla's gaze shifted just as two figures broke from the circle. Elder Tobias, tall and thin, with a scar like a lightning strike down his left cheek, and Elder Miro, the newest and most enigmatic voice among them. Tobias reached into the fold of his cloak and slipped something into Miro's palm, a subtle transfer. But Kael saw it. He tensed. A low, guttural growl vibrated through the air. Ayla's heart skipped. It wasn't anger, it was recognition. His ears flicked, eyes sharpened. "Miro," Ayla whispered, kneeling beside Kael. "You know that scent, don't you?" Kael didn't move his gaze. His muscles coiled, tail rigid. Something in the handoff triggered a memory. A scent. A signal from the past tone Ayla didn't have the key to decode, but Kael clearly did. The fire crackled inside the longhouse. The bowl filled slowly with the weight of consequence. Dagon hadn't moved. His eyes stared straight ahead, lips pressed in a thin line that trembled only once when Tobias passed him without meeting his gaze. The vote concluded with a haunting finality. No names were called. No results were spoken aloud. Only the ceremonial keeper reached in with both hands and pulled the answer from ash and bark. A moment passed. 2. Then a whisper, meant for the room but heard by Ayla through the brittle hush of night. "The motion passes. The chiefdom will be reviewed. Dagon will step aside for reconsideration. The longhouse, for all its heritage and sacredness, felt colder in that moment. Outside, Ayla clenched her jaw. A sudden ache bloomed in her chest sharp. Unfair, bitter. Dagon had made mistakes. She knew that. But this wasn't about justice anymore. It was about power. And who was willing to be bought? Footsteps approached. Ayla stood quickly, brushing pine needles from her jeans. Kale rose with her. The first figure to emerge was Tobias. He glanced toward the tree liney and paused. His eyes met Ayla's for a flicker of a moment. No surprise, no guilt, just calculation. Then came Miro. He walked with his head high, but the pouch he now tucked into his coat gave him away. A leather bag, stitched with a symbol Ayla recognized from one of the casino documents Kale had nosed at days ago. Corporate insignia, developers, blood money. Ayla stepped out into the open, letting the firelight catch her face. "I saw what you did," she said clearly, her voice steady. Miro stopped. Tobias kept walking. "I don't know what you think you saw," Miro replied, tone wrapped in polite venom. "But this is tribal business." Kale growled again. Louder this time. Miro's eyes flicked downward, and fear cracked through his composure. "I'd listen to him if I were you," Ayla said. "He doesn't growl without cause." "Control your mutt, meterist." Kale surged forward a step. Not an attack, a warning. Miro stumbled back. Ayla let silence speak for her. She didn't need to fight him here. Not now. But the seed had been planted, and the tribe would soon learn that some roots were poisoned. The rest of the elders filtered out slowly, faces half hidden by cloak hoods and time-worn shame. Only one elder soon offered Ayla a glance of sorrow, the kind that carried regret without words. She returned to Dagon, who now stood alone beneath the dying firelight. They voted, he said, more to the shadows than to her. "I know," Ayla replied. Dagon turned to her, eyes rimmed with the kind of fatigue only truth can bring. "It was never really about the vote." "No," she agreed. "It was about fear and convenience." He lowered himself to the ground beside Kyle, who nosed into his palm with surprising gentleness. For a moment, none of them spoke. Above them, stars blinked into being one by one, indifferent to power, politics, or pain. But beneath those stars, in a land that remembered more than it forgave, something had shifted, and Ayla knew the reckoning wasn't finished. Not yet. The hospice sat on the edge of the reservation like a forgotten whisper half shadowed by pine trees, its wood-paneled walls worn from seasons of neglect. No one came here unless death was closer than truth. That night, the wind carried the scent of rain and ash, and Chief Dagon Greyhawk moved like a ghost. He parked the truck far down the dirt road, headlights off, boots sinking into the wet moss with each step. His breath clouded the air, not from cold, but from something heavier shame wrapped in silence. The night nurse barely glanced up as he entered, the brim of his hat low. She was paid well enough not to ask questions. "Room 7. Serena." He paused outside the door. The soft beeping of a heart monitor seeped through the thin wood. With a hand that had signed treaties and held the weight of legacy, he turned the knob and stepped inside. Serena lay propped up by pillows, frail but not broken. Her silver hair spilled over her shoulders like riverlight, eyes sharp even in her near collapse. A tube fed into her arm. Machines whispered in rhythm. But she was alert. And waiting. "I figured it would be you," she rasped, not looking at him. "Only someone with guilt walks like that." Dagon removed his hat and placed it on the small table beside the door. "You shouldn't be alone in here," she scoffed. "Don't pretend now, not after all these years." "Oh." He sat, folding his hands as if in prayer. "But no gods would come here. I thought you were dead, Serena." I grieved. "No, Dagon," she said, voice brittle. "You pretended I was dead. It made it easier to rise in the ranks. Easier to explain to a young girl why her mother vanished in smoke. I kept Ayla safe. You kept her small." Her eyes flared. "She grew up thinking her mother abandoned her. You clipped her wings to shield her from the truth. That's not protection, that's control." Kale would have barked if he were here, would have sensed the tremble in his master's hand. But only the machines spoke now. Dagon leaned forward, voice low. "Do you think she would have survived?" Knowing what we really did in those labs? The experiments? The failures? The blood? She deserved to know. Deserved me. A long pause stretched like winter between them. Serena shifted, pain flashing across her face. Her hand trembled as she reached for a glass of water. Dagan rose instinctively, held it to her lips. She drank, eyes never leaving his. When he set it down, she said softly, "You were brave once. Before the council, before the casino men, before you traded spirit for politics. That's not fair. I watched you from the shadows, Dagan. You let them offer blood money for our land. You watched them bribe the council, and you hesitated. You always hesitate when it matters most." His jaw clenched. "It's not that simple." "It is. You just don't like what the choice costs." He looked away, throat tight. In the corner, a photo rested on the nightstand. Serena, younger, smiling. A pregnant belly. Cale beside her, tongue out, tail mid-wag. "Life before war. She found your journal," he murmured. Serena's face softened. "And the map?" He nodded. "She's ready then," she whispered, closing her eyes for a moment. "More than either of us ever were. She's still a child." "She's a fire, Dagan, and you're the one throwing water." The silence that followed cut deeper than the words. "I was scared," he said finally. "Not of you, not of the truth, of losing her, of seeing her walk into the same storm that broke you." Serena opened her eyes again. They glistened not with tears, but with clarity. "You don't get to choose the storm, only whether you raise her to face it or run." Dagan stood, heart heavy. "You're dying," she smiled faintly. "We all are. Some of us just get a countdown." He turned to leave, hand on the doorknob, but her voice stopped him. "Tell her I never stopped loving her," Serena said, "even when the world told me to forget." He didn't turn around. "She'll know." And then, softer, "I'm sorry, Serena." But the machines only kept ticking, indifferent. Behind him, the woman who had once commanded elite missions, tamed wolves, and bore the weight of a nation's secrets lay still beneath a threadbare quilt, staring at the ceiling like it held stars she used to chase. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling the pines. Dagan stepped into the darkness, swallowed by it. The clearing was drenched in ritual that evening smoke spiraled upward from cedar braziers, and concentric circles of sand bore symbols of protection and renewal. Elders stood solemnly around the perimeter, draped in intricate beadwork and stag pelts, their voices raised in chanting honor of tradition, ancestry, and the spirit of the land. Ayla stood at the edge, Cale by her side, both draped in ceremonial shawls they had crafted in anticipation. She had memorized the chants, practiced the motions, but deep down, she knew tonight was bigger than any ceremony. It was a stand. "Purification begins," intoned Elder Neoma, her voice low and resonant as she led a circle around the inner ring, sprinkling sage smoke in slow, deliberate patterns. People watched in hushed reverence. The wind held its breath. Suddenly, a hush rippled through the crowd. On her second circuit, Neoma halted, waving someone forward from the ritual circle. A young apprentice stepped unsteadily across the sacred sand, stumbling to a stop. He looked at Neoma, then at Ayla. Then he froze. They all froze. Eyes darted between the twow hat disturbance. What breach? The apprentice, eyes wide, then whispered into Neoma's ear. Neoma's calm veneer cracked, her next breath shuddering as she backed away. She signaled the apprentice toward the center of the ring. He lifted his head, pointing directly at Ayla. "Amor morose." Ayla didn't move. She just started walking into the sacred circle, ensuring Cale followed. Staff members blocked her path, but Elder Jorik stepped forward, voice sharp. "You cannot be here," he said. "This is for initiated before history-nodding events." Ayla stopped within the circle's boundary. The firelight glowed on her face bright, hard, unwavering. "My mother was initiated here," she replied evenly. "And this land holds her spirit. And mine." A stifled gasp from the elders. Then the murmurs, "Is she claiming lineage? The chief's daughter. This is sacrilege." Ayla unfurled her arms and whispered a command in the old military Mustang Tonia. Single word faint, powerful, resonant. "Sit." Cale obeyed in one smooth motion. Not just obedient, he acted with authority, calm assurance, as if he'd done it 1,000 times. And for this exact moment, a silence, sharper than any blade, swept through the crowd. Elder Neoma's voice cut through it. "What have you done?" Ayla raised her voice so every ear could hear. "Kale remembers. He remembers the trust she built. He remembers more than you gave me credit for." She gestured to Kale and asked the question that had shackled her since that first demonstration. "Chief Dagon, why does your dog obey me better than you?" The words landed like thunderclaps. Dagon's figure, at the edge of the circle, stiffened. His shawl rustled in the wind. His gaze flicked between Kale and Ayla, then up at the assembled elders. "A promise," he answered quietly but loud enough. "A bond I underestimated." Murmurs erupted. Some cheered intrigued support. Others glared deeply offended. Elder Neoma's face was unreadable. Elder Jorik shook his head. Children whispered. Ayla didn't flinch. She stayed centered, her eyes never leaving Dagon. "You taught him," she said, "but you denied teaching me. You denied me as blood, as trainer, as daughter. I wasn't part of your legacy until it suited you. Kale always was. Why?" Dagon's jaw tensed. Several heartbeats passed. "Stop this," Jorik barked. "This is not the place." Ayla stood her ground. "This is the place. Family and tradition. This ceremony is about healing the land. I'm healing a wound that's been gaping for 13 years. At that, Kale rose and trotted to Elder Neoma, nuzzling her hand gently. She froze. The ember of smoke flickered at her fingertips. She closed her eyes. The chanting paused. And then she stepped back. Kale returned to Ayla, panting softly. "This land remembers promises," Neoma said softly, voice rattling through the night. "And it calls us to fulfill them." A gust swept leaves into the sacred ring, carrying them toward Dagon. He hesitated, then stepped forward, following her command as if the wind had wrapped authority around him. Covered in ceremonial earth and flamelight, Dagon dropped to one knee before Ayla. The crowd exhaled. Kale sat and watched. He spoke into the hush. His voice broke. "I taught Kale, but I taught you too so much more than you've had the chance to learn. I willfully buried that knowledge when I feared it would break everything." He reached into the folds of his shawl and withdrew a beaded bracelet, Serena's workmanship, shining with turquoise and ingrained history. He pressed it into Ayla's hand. "You deserve this, the way I should have given you sooner. I will not deny you again." A cry rose up, not a protest or a cheer, but the sound of release. A soft, collective lowering of breath. The fire in the braziers brightened. The sand pulsed with heat. A moment passed. Then Neoma raised her arms. "Let the cleansing resume," she intoned, voice echoing. Kale returned to his place beside Ayla. She wove a strand of her shawl gently through his collar, and together they watched the ritual begin anew this time, a cleansing of more than earth and spirit, a cleansing of broken blood and buried truths. The night air was brittle with silence. Stars blinked faintly above the mountain ridge, cloaked in the same solemn hush that had settled over Dagon's shoulders. He walked alone through the forest path that once led to glory, a trail lined with memory and mistake. His boots disturbed a few scattered pine needles, but even the forest seemed reluctant to acknowledge his presence. He hadn't told anyone where he was going, not Ayla, not the elders, not even the men in suits who still circled like wolves outside the council hall. He just drifted. And somehow, his feet brought him here, the arena. Once a training ground, now an open wound. The moonlight spilled across the clearing, revealing the curved wooden posts of the fence weather-beaten, splintered by time, but still standing, just like him. Barely. He stepped over the worn threshold, boots crunching on frozen dirt. In the center, the earth had been kicked and clawed so many times it no longer belonged to grass. Only scars remained. Dagon stood there for a long moment. Then his eyes caught something half buried beneath the bench, the old wooden one Serena used to sit on while training KL. His breath snagged in his throat. Slowly, he knelt. His fingers brushed over the edge of a cracked red rubber ball, dulled by age. The color bled into the soil. He lifted it gently, turning it over in his hands. On one side, faint ink markings trembled beneath dust. For Kale, trust starts with a game. Love, S. Serena's handwriting. Dagon sat heavily on the bench, the toy still in his grasp. And finally, he let himself collapse not in body, but in belief. He had spent years pretending strength. As chief, as protector, as father. But here, under a sky too wide for lies, he allowed the weight to come crashing down. "I didn't mean for it to go this way," he whispered to the shadows, to himself. The trees offered no reply. He clutched the toy tighter, his knuckles bone white. "I just wanted to keep her safe. Keep all of you safe. From the world. From her." His voice cracked around the word. Serena. He remembered their fight's blades sharpened by love, dulled by war. She'd warned him, pleaded, told him Ayla was different, that Kale had chosen her, that burying the truth would only grow ghosts. But he hadn't listened. He'd buried Serena's work, her warnings, her warmth. He'd buried Ayla's birthright beneath layers of politics and secrecy. And for what? To delay chaos? To protect tradition? Or was it just fear? Fear that Kayla dog-bred to obey had chosen his daughter over him. Fear that Serena's fire had passed not to the tribe, but to a teenage girl with too much heart and not enough guidance. He stared down at the ball. His thumb traced the ink. She always believed in connection, not control. A quiet rustle echoed from the edge of the arena. Dagan looked up, startled, but it was only a bird shifting in the trees. Still, it reminded him of Kale, of the first time the puppet darted across this very field-eager, clumsy eyes like flint and fire. He remembered Serena's laughter, how she clapped when Kale fetched the ball for the first time, how she whispered to him like he was more than a dog. Not trained. Trusted, she used to say. Dagan hadn't understood back then. Maybe he still didn't. But tonight, that trust draw and undomesticated felt more real than any of his counseled decrees. He looked up at the stars. "You were right," he said softly, unsure if he was speaking to Serena or to the cold wind. "You knew Kale better than I ever did. You knew Ayla too." His eyes stung. "I thought power came from silence, from structure. But she speaks to him without words. He listens to her like she's music." He shook his head and laughed bitterly. "What does that make me?" For a long while, he sat in silence, the toy in his lap, the arena around him breathing like an old, sleeping memory. Then, slowly, he placed the ball on the bench, like an offering, not to Kale, not even to Serena, but to the part of himself that still wanted to believe he could change. He stood, his back cracked like bark. The years weighed heavy again. But something inside had loosened a knot unthreaded. He stepped out of the arena without looking back, letting the ghosts keep their ground. From the shadows, a low shape watched him disappear into the trees. KL, quiet, still, guarding the arena not as a soldier but as a witness. And when he approached the bench, Kale didn't pick up the ball. He simply lay beside it, eyes half closed, as if remembering the first time it bounced. The past didn't need to be rewritten. It only needed to be honored. The first thing Ayla noticed was the smell. It hit her like a memory acrid, sharp, and unmistakably wrong. Smoke. But not from a hearth or ceremony. This was biting, chemical, and angry. Her boots struck the dry earth as she ran. Kale already ahead of her, ears pinned back, muscles taut like a bowstring. The trail of soot in the air told them exactly where to go. The ancestral library. When she crested the ridge, her breath caught. Flames had already swallowed half the structure. A pillar of fire devouring cedar beams and bark-woven walls. Orange tongues licked the sky, spitting ash like snowflakes. The oldest part of the reservation where generations had etched their lineage into fragile parchment and encoded dog lineages into the folds of handwritten scrolls was being eaten alive. "No!" she screamed, her voice cracking as if something inside her splintered. Kale barked furiously beside her, his body pressed forward, tail rigid. Without hesitation, Ayla yanked her hoodie over her mouth and rushed toward the blaze. Several villagers had formed a makeshift line, passing buckets of muddy river water, but it was too late. The flames had a hunger no bucket could match. She didn't hesitate. Not when Serena's letter was still inside. That letter, hidden inside the spine of the old genealogy codex, was the only remaining thing that hadn't been copied, hadn't been spoken of aloud. Serena had warned her, "If something happens to me, you'll know what to look for. The truth is not in stories, it's in the names." Ayla ducked past a smoldering beam as it collapsed behind her with a groan. She dropped to the floor, crawling low beneath the rising smoke, Kale bounding behind her through the chaos, unfazed by fire the way only war-born dogs could be. The archive shelves had already begun to collapse, 1,000 years of memory crumbling into blackened ash. She moved by muscle memory, guided by Serena's old instructions. Second shelf from the northern corner, third book in, bound in red leather, spine cracked at the bottom. It was there ore had been. "Please," Ayla whispered through clenched teeth. "Please, still be here." The heat was unbearable now. Her eyes streamed from the smoke, and each breath felt like swallowing needles. Kale barked behind her, alerting her to a new collapse, but she found it. The codex. It was half-burned on the edges, its cover peeling back like flesh in the fire. But it was intact enough. She reached inside the spine and felt the envelope, brittle and curled with age. She snatched it just as the shelf gave way. Ayla screamed as splinters raked across her shoulder. But Kale lunged, gripping her jacket and dragging her sideways with brute strength that felt almost human. Together, they burst out through a side window as the building let out a deep, groaning sigh and fell in on itself. The night lit up behind Tame and Inferno, silhouetting two shadows, girl and dog, both coughing, staggering through the falling ash. They collapsed behind a tree, Ayla clutching the letter to her chest, Kale's flank heaving against hers as his breath rasped from his throat. Ayla didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, she looked down at the envelope. Serena's handwriting, faint and half-burned on one edge, still read, "For Ayla." When silence becomes unbearable, her fingers trembled, but she didn't open it. Not yet. Behind them, the flames consumed what could never be rebuilt. Birth histories, war dog chronicles, elders' testimonies inked in charcoal, passed down for those who dared remember. Gone. The fire crews arrived late, too late, and Dagan arrived even later, his eyes wide. Shirt half-buttoned, confusion plain on his face. He stood still, watching the flames like he didn't know what to feel. But Kale did. He let out a low, guttural growl. Ayla didn't need to say anything. She followed his gaze toward one of the onlookers, an outsider in a pressed denim jacket, sunglasses still hanging from his collar even in the dark. His boots were too clean, his face too calm. She memorized it. He watched the fire like it was a fireworks show. No sorrow, no loss, just satisfaction. One of the tribal elders was standing beside him, and for a split second, Ayla saw it. A folded piece of paper passed from one hand to the other. Then it vanished into a pocket. Betrayal wasn't loud. It never was. It lived in glances, in envelopes passed beneath the veil of ash, in buildings that were torched the night before a vote. Ayla clutched the envelope tighter and pressed her forehead to Kale's. "We saved what matters," she whispered. Kale licked her cheek, soft and steady. A gesture not of comfort, but solidarity. As if to say, "I saw it too." And in that silence, something burned hotter than the fire behind them. Resolve. The ash still clung to the morning air like ghosts that hadn't yet decided to leave. Ayla stood barefoot near the charred husk of the ancestral library, its stone skeleton jutting out like bones from a pyre. Her fingers were streaked with soot and blood. Serena's letter clenched tightly in her fist. Saved only by chance and Kale's insistence, they searched behind the old genealogy shelf. The Restbirth records, bloodline scrolls, the dog-human empathy maps were gone. Kale had been pacing since dawn, head low, ears twitching at sounds Ayla couldn't hear. Now his entire body froze. Then a single low growl. Ayla turned. "What is it, boy?" Kale's nose hovered above a patch of overturned dirt near the creek that wrapped around the ceremonial ring. He sniffed again, then bolted into the tree-line, muscles surging, legs like coiled wire loosed. "Kel." Ayla ran after him, heart hammering. Each step took her deeper into the edge of the forest where ceremony gave way to shadow. Then she heard it. A shout, a scuffle, a man's voice cracking in panic. She emerged into a clearing. Kale had him pinned. A Monone of the new elders, Micah Rains, expensive leather boots half kicked off, arms flailing in the dirt. Kale's jaws were around his shoulder, not biting down, just holding, like a lion daring its prey not to move. "Get him off!" Micah screeched, eyes wild. "You've trained him to kill." "Kale," Ayla said, her voice low, calm, commanding. Release. Kale didn't move. His eyes burned not with anger, but something deeper. A betrayed vigilance. The kind of look Ayla had only seen once before, when Kale stood over the body of another dog he couldn't save. "Kale," she said again, stepping closer, palm extended. "That's not who we are." Kale released slowly, not like a dog obeying, like a soldier withdrawing from a war he didn't start. Micah scrambled up, but Ayla stepped between him and the trees. "Why were you out here?" Two was looking for damage. The fire. It might have spread. In Italian loafers? Micah glanced down, chest heaving. Kale paced beside her now, silent, but watching. There was soot on Micah's sleeve, distinct, fresh, and under his nails, wax residue. Ayla saw it in an instant. Ritual candles. Used in the library's inner altar. Not something you just happened to pick up walking by. "You said it," she said, not as a question. "You burned it all." Micah's lips curled. "You should have stayed gone, girl. You and your mutt." The words hit harder than a slap. Ayla stepped forward, but Kale blocked, her putting his body between hers and the man like a wall of muscle and breath. "You don't belong here," Micah hissed. "The land was never going to save you." "No," Ayla said, her voice steady. "But the truth might." She raised Serena's letter still in her hand. It trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what it carried. "You tried to burn history," she said, "but my mother knew you'd come. She hid this for me. And Kale remembered where." Micah's smirk faltered. "You know what's in it?" she added. "She names, and timelines, and where the money came from?" Micah took a step back. Kale growled, not a threat, but a warning from something older than law. "Run if you want," Ayla said. "But Kale won't forget your scent." Micah bolted. Kale didn't chase. He simply turned to Ayla, head bowed, eyes softening, like fury had passed through him and left only clarity. She crouched beside him, burying her face in his thick neck fur. "You did good, Kale. You didn't need to bite to be heard." His tail thumped once, a silent drumbeat in the dirt. Then Ayla stood, brushing soot from her knees, her chest aching with the aftermath of something neither spoken nor entirely understood. They walked back to the ruins together, her hand on his back, his shoulder brushing hers with every step. Ash still fell from the sky, soft as sorrow. But somewhere inside it all, truth had just grown teeth. The paper crackled between Ayla's trembling fingers. Its edges were singed rescued, seconds before the fire consumed the ancestral library. Smoke still lingered in her braids and clung to Kale's fur. The night was thick with silence, except for the distant hiss of cooling ash and the steady rhythm of Kale's breath beside her. She sat cross-legged on the floor of the medicine lodge, the firelight flickering against the walls painted in ancestral glyphs. The elders had gone home. Dagon hadn't shown his face, and the only truth that remained was sealed inside this letter, Serena's final gift. Kale sat vigil beside her, as if sensing the magnitude. Ayla unfolded the parchment slowly. The handwriting was unmistakably Legant, but weathered, each letter drawn with the intention of someone who knew they might not live to speak these words aloud. "My Ayla, if you're reading this, it means the fire has begun, not just the kind that devours buildings, but the one that spreads through blood and memory." Ayla swallowed. Her chest tightened. "You've always asked who you are. You're not just a daughter of the wild, not just the girl who returned from the outside. You are the legacy of two bloodlines, mine and his. But more than that, you are what we never dared to name out loud, the bridge." Her hands trembled harder. She glanced at Kale, who watched her with those patient, ancient eyes, as if he, too, had been waiting for this. "When I was young, I broke tradition. I loved someone I was forbidden to love, your father, not Dagon, the man who led the dog line before him. His name was Rafe, a silent, fierce man. We hid our bond for seasons until the winter you were conceived. But the elders feared what our child would mean, a merging of rival lineages, a threat to the rigid customs that held this tribe together with cracked bone and brittle rules." Ayla's breath hitched. She had always known she was different. The silences, the sideways glances, the elders' reluctance to acknowledge her in council matters. But this was blood deep. To protect you, I let them rewrite your origin. They claimed you were born from my mistake with Dagon. They shamed me, but they let you live, and I watched you grow like wildfire under snow, unpredictable and beautiful. I knew one day the tribe would need you, not as a warrior, but as the one who could see in both light and shadow, the one who didn't belong, and because of that, could speak to both. Ayla blinked back the sting in her eyes. The ink bled slightly near the bottom. Serena must have written this in secret, perhaps late into her final days, when her hands began to shake and her mind refused sleep. There is a clause buried in our oldest law, one even Dagon cannot ignore. A child born from both dog line and spirit line, raised under silence, has the legal right to challenge the chief domif, and only if the tribe's survival is at stake. Her heart thundered. Challenge the chiefdom? Kale growled softly, sensing the shift in her voice. You'll know when the time is right. I trust you, Ayla. Not because of your blood, but because of your heart. Kale chose you for a reason. The dogs know the soul long before the tribe ever does. Her tears slipped silently down her cheeks. She read the final line 3 times before letting the letter fall to her lap. Don't be the fire, child. Be the light after it. M. For a moment, the world narrowed to just her and Kale, surrounded by smoke ghosts and the echo of Serena's voice lingering in the woven fibers of the lodge. She touched the letter gently, as if it were Serena's hand itself. Her mother had never once said, I love you, in words. But this was love carved into fireproof ink. Kale whined and nudged her shoulder. Then, as if answering some unspoken call, he stood and padded over to the door, nosing it open. Cold air spilled in. Ayla rose, clutching the letter, her breath now steady. She stepped outside into the hush of midnight. The stars had returned after the smoke. She looked toward the arena, where Dagon once stood proud, where her own name had never been spoken aloud during ceremonies. Not yet. Not until now. Kale circled back and leaned against her leg, his body warm, grounding. Serena was right, Ayla whispered, voice raw. You knew, didn't you? Kale licked the air softly, then stared out toward the council hall. The vote, the corruption, the fire. This wasn't just betrayal. This was the beginning of something deeper, a reckoning. And she, the girl raised in shadow, forgotten then returned, would no longer ask for a place at the table. She would build a new one. The council hall felt colder than ever. Though the fire pit still burned, its warmth barely reached the stone walls, carved with tribal emblem symbols of history that now resembled headstones. On the far end, Ayla stood alone. No restraints, just resolve. Her coat was singed, boots stained with ash from the fire that had consumed the ancestral library. Beside her lay Kale, silent and watchful, more sentinel than dog. High Elder Mako rose, voice sharp. Ayla Nightwind, you stand not as a criminal but as a disruption. A question mark in the bones of our way of life. Is that what you intended? Ayla answered evenly. I didn't intend anything. But if asking why truth burns in fire, and why a dog obeys a girl over a chief, makes me a disruption, maybe your foundation was never solid to begin with. Murmurs stirred. Elder Kamani stood. You challenged a chief. During ceremony, you gave an order to his own K9. Kale's gaze tracked him, unblinking. I asked the question, Ayla said. The dog responded not to me, but to history training my mother gave him. Serena's handwriting lives in him. I only woke it up. Elder Shay, old and sharp-eyed, nodded. And yet it is you who brought the training back to life. Ayla didn't argue. Truth needed no defense. Then Dagon entered unadorned, unreadable. Kyle's ears twitched. A low growl rippled through him. Primal. Controlled. Control your dog, one elder snapped. Ayla didn't flinch. He's not mine. He chooses where to stand. Oh. The room stiffened. From inside her coat, Ayla drew out a charred letter. My mother hid this in the library. She wrote it before she got sick. It proves I come from both lines, Nightwind and Anari. She never claimed power because she hoped I wouldn't need to. But now, the archives are gone. Your dog obeys me. Elders pass money when they think no one's watching. An eruption followed denials, protests, shifting glances. One councilman quietly stepped away from Dagon's side. Kale didn't move. Elder Shay struck her staff 3 times. Silence returned. Ayla, she said, Do you know what you're doing? Yes, Ayla replied. I'm not trying to take power. I'm reminding you why it mattered in the first place. Kale wasn't meant to be a weapon. He was a bridge. At that word bridge, Kale stood. Calm, tall, unshaken. Not a threat, a protector. And Dagon looked shaken. We will deliberate, Shay said, in silence. With him, she pointed to Kale, guarding the door. One by one, the elders filed out. Ayla stayed, silent. Kale lay at her feet again. And for the first time in days, she rested her hand gently on his head, not as command, but as memory. She wasn't alone. Hospice Room 7 smelled of clean linen and pine-scented polish. Serena lay pale and fragile, her breath a brittle thread between life and goodbye. Dagon interred quietly. Serena, he whispered, his voice thick with regret. Her eyes fluttered open. You came back, she rasped. I had to. For Ayla. For you. A tired smile flickered. Better late than never. He took her hand. I'm sorry. She shook her head faintly. Don't, not now. Then, with effort, she raised one trembling finger. Listen. Dagon leaned close. Don't choose power again, she whispered. Choose her. She meant Ayla. Dagon barely nodded as her hand squeezed once, then stilled. The monitor flatlined. The oxygen hissed, then stopped. He stayed beside her, tears falling, heart hollowed by silence. Then he ran. The council chamber loomed ahead. Dagon burst in, gasping, gown flapping behind him. Inside, hushed debate. Ayla in the center. Kale beside her, unmoving. Shay stood. Chief Greyhawk, she said. We were about to vote. Kale turned his head. A soft, mournful whine escaped him. Dagon steadied himself. The path forward must honor what she asked me to remember. He bowed. Ayla looked at him not with fury, but grief and understanding. Shay turned. We will begin again, with compassion. She raised her voice. All in favor of acknowledging Ayla Nightwind as heir and bridge? Hands lifted, some unsure, some proud. Kale remained at her side, still as stone. Ayla exhaled just once. And in that breath, something ancient began to heal. Morning filtered into the chamber through the high skylight. Sunlight spilled across the tribal circle. Smoke spiraled gently upward, as if the ancestors were leaning in. Dagon stepped into the center knot in uniform, but ceremonial robes passed down from generations. Around his neck, tribal beads. In his hands, the Nightwind crest, pine-braided leather, raven feathers, an obsidian bear at the center. Across from him stood Ayla, Kale by her side. Dagon looked at her with defiance in her eyes, the echoes of Serena's fire, unbroken. I spent too long believing blood was something to bury, Dagon said. That silence protected us. But silence only shields the ones doing harm. Murmurs rippled. Shay nodded solemnly. This crest belonged to my grandfather, Dagon continued. I denied it to my daughter out of fear, but not anymore. He stepped forward, hands trembling only slightly, and offered the crest. Ayla stared at it, unmoving. Why now? She asked quietly. He held her gaze. Because Serena made me promise, not to choose power, to choose you. Her throat caught. She took the crest slowly, feeling its warmth not just in her hand but in her blood. Dagon stepped back. Before you all, I acknowledge Ayla Nightwind as my daughter. Not in secret, not with shame, but with pride. Gasps. Then applause first scattered, then rising like thunder. Shay wiped a tear. Others stood. A few elders remained seated, stone-faced. But it didn't matter. The people had spoken. Ayla turned toward them, her grip on the crest firm. For the first time, she felt like she belonged not as a relic of the past, but as its reckoning. Kale let out a soft, satisfied huff. As if he knew. The bridge had been rebuilt. And outside, the developers in Black Car's contract folders in hand watched their leverage dissolve. Inside, the tribal lawyer who had been trying to push the vote through stepped forward. With all due respect, Chief Greyhawk, she said carefully, the land use deal with Crown Hawk Gaming is time-sensitive. If we delay, we could lose the offer entirely. Dagon didn't even look at her. The offer can wait, he said. Our people cannot. He turned back to Ayla. This land belongs to more than just signatures. It remembers, it watches, it forgives. Ayla stepped beside him, still holding the crest. "But only if we choose to protect it," she said. The crowd roared again, this time louder. The casino deal stalled that day not by formal rejection, but by erosion. Confidence in the plan frayed as whispers of legacy and betrayal swirled through the people. The land didn't want a tower, it wanted healing. And in that sacred chamber, under the weight of smoke and ancestry, a father's choice echoed beyond bloodlines into the hearts of those who once looked at Dagon with doubt and now saw a man choosing truth over power. As the elders adjourned, Ayla walked out not as an outsider, but as a daughter returned. The call of the elkhorn echoed across the valley as the sun crested the ridge. Its sound rolled through the trees like a memory too old for words. Ayla stood just beyond the stone circle, her hand resting on Cale's back. The dog sat alert, catching the golden light, ears up. He didn't move, but he understood. Today, he was being called by name. The elders stood in a half-circle near the ancestral wall, a towering slab etched with the names of those who gave everything for the tribe. Among the names were 6 paw prints, sacred guardians. Today, there would be a 7th. Shay approached with a leather-bound ledger, her voice trembling but not weak. "Cale," she said, "son of the wind, born under the storm moon, trained to protect, broken by betrayal, restored not by order, but by love." A murmur passed through the crowd. Elders, children, men with braids and scars. Shay continued, "He warned us when we would not listen. He stayed when others fled, and he chose not vengeance, but belonging." Ayla's hand curled in Cale's fur. He glanced at her, then forward again resolute. "By the council's vote," Shay said, stepping aside, "Cale is recognized as the last of the sacred guardians." Dagon approached with a carved obsidian paw print set in cedar. He knelt before Cale and whispered, "Forgive me for not seeing you sooner." Cale didn't move, but something in his gaze answered. Dagon pressed the token into the final space on the wall. The soundstone meeting stone rang out like a distant bell. Ayla stepped forward. "When I found him," she said, "they said he was broken. They were wrong. He was waiting for someone to believe him." Then the oldest elder stepped forward, back bent, voice clear. "We remember," she said, placing her hand on Cale's head, "the old ways, when the four-legged were kin." Children came next, offering feathers, bracelets, even a melted crayon. Cale accepted them all in silence. The wall caught the light, casting Kyle's paw print in gold. It would stand eternal not for obedience, but for the choice to protect. Later, Ayla sat with him in the grass, watching the smoke rise. "You brought us back," she whispered. Cale leaned against her, just enough to say, "I know." That night, the council fire had not yet been lit, but the space felt sacred. Ayla followed Shay into the ring of cedar benches. Cale trailed just behind and sat at the edge, always close. Shay gestured to a low bench. "The place of witness. It hasn't been filled in a long time." Ayla sat, her heart heavy with something old and nameless. Not readiness, but recognition. The fire was kindled. Sage, sweetgrass, cedar. It didn't blaze. It breathed. Dagon stood. "Tonight, we speak not just as guardians of the past, but those who must reckon with it." He turned to Ayla and Cale. "Truth was buried. This child unearthed it." An elder with silver hair spoke next. "Ayla joins us not as leader, but as symbol of a generation born not just from tradition, but from truth." Ayla nodded. Then she stood unprompted. "I don't know all the old words," she said, "but I know what I saw. A dog who should have been dead wasn't people who turned away, and the damage that caused." She paused. "Even when no one believed him, Cale stayed. Even when he was hurt, he protected us. I think that's what a guardian is. Not someone who follows rules. Someone who shows you even when it hurts." She stepped to the fire. "I want to take an oath. Not as a leader, just as me." She placed one hand on her heart. "I swear to remember every name carved into that wall and every name that should have been. I swear to protect the ones who can't speak, even if I have to shout. I swear to never look away." The fire cracked loud and sudden. The eldest elder crossed the ring and pressed a bundle of red thread into Ayla's hand. "Tie it to your wrist," she said. "One strand for every promise." Ayla nodded and tied it twice tight, but not to hurt, just to remember. As the council spoke on, Ayla sat. Kale leaned into her knee. And they listened, because this time they had been asked to. At dawn, Ayla crossed the old training field with Kale at her side. The grounds were overgrown now, moss reclaiming memory. Kale's ears lifted. He moved guided by something not urgent, but remembered. He led her to a rusted outbuilding near the trees. Inside, it smelled of earth and oil. Kale sniffed, then stopped pawing at the dirt beneath a cot. Ayla knelt. Her fingers found a buried tin box. Inside, a cassette player, 2 labeled tapes, and a note in Serena's hand. Just one word. For him. She placed the tape into the player and pressed play. Serena's voice came through, not weak or frail, but strong. Kale, if you're hearing this, it means you lived. Kale didn't move, but he listened deeper. I trained you to protect the things that can't protect themselves. You were the last I trusted, not a weapon, a guardian. A pause. Do you remember Ayla's laugh? You used to nudge her until she'd fall back in the grass, giggling like nothing else mattered. I saw it then. Not a soldier, a soul. Ayla's hand touched his fur. There were things I couldn't protect her from. Lies older than her. I thought if I hid the edges, she wouldn't get cut. But I was wrong. Kale whined softly. When it does hurt, Kale, don't leave her. You're not just her dog. You're her witness to what we did right and what we didn't. The tape clicked. Then the second tape began marked simply memory. It was Serena humming. A soft tune. Ayla didn't recognize it, but Kale did. He moved forward, ears tilted, and then he howled. Not a cry, not pain. A sound of remembering. Of recognition, I heard you, I came back. Ayla didn't interrupt. She just listened. When it ended, Kale lay beside the box, pressing his nose to it gently. Ayla whispered, She trained you to remember when we forgot. Kale looked at her. His eyes were wet with something too deep for language. His tail moved once. Not joy, not grief, closure. They sat together, girl and dog, surrounded by wood and quiet. Outside, the world turned fires lit, chores resumed, the council prepared under stars. But here, in this quiet, forgotten place, something sacred had ended, and something eternal had just begun. The sun filtered weakly through the canopy of ancient pine, dappling the earth in scattered gold. Beneath the gnarled branches of the war tree whose trunk bore the scars of storms and stories long past, Ayla knelt. Her fingers trembled as she held the small wooden urn against her chest, feeling the warmth of memory pulse through the grain like a final heartbeat. Dagan stood a pace behind her, silent. No chief regalia today, no council eyes, no symbols of power. Just a man who had buried too many truths and was now burying one more. His daughter's shoulders were narrow, small even beneath her ceremonial shawl, but the way she held herself rooted and still reminded him of Serena when she was young. Stubborn, unshakable. Kale lay between them, his large body motionless but alert, golden eyes watching the urn as if understanding the gravity of what it held. His ears twitched with every breeze, but his posture remained reverent. Grounded. This place had once been a battlefield, a council ground, a burial site. Now it would carry another name in its soil. I thought she'd want it here, Ayla finally whispered, tracing a finger along the carved feather etched into the urn's lid. She told me once, Dagan murmured, that she didn't believe in heaven, not the kind people spoke about. She said memory was the only sky we ever got, that if we remembered someone right, it was enough. Ayla looked up at him. Do you remember her right? Dagan's breath caught in his throat. He had spent so long clinging to the version of Serena that made sense for the world he led strong, capable, compliant when it mattered. But now, here in the hush of trees and grief, he allowed the weight of the real Serena to rise. The woman who had refused to choose between love and justice, who had whispered truths when the council shouted rules, who had left behind a daughter not as an act of abandonment, but as a final gamble that hope would outlast exile. I do now, he said, together. They began to dig. There was no shovel, no ceremony of tools, just their bare hands. The earth was damp and forgiving, like it had been waiting. Ayla's nails filled with soil. Dagon's palms scraped against old roots. Time bled through their fingers as the hole deepened not just for Serena, but for the weight of years unspoken. When it was done, Ayla placed the urn into the hollow with the tenderness of a child tucking in a parent. Cale moved closer, lowering his head until his nose brushed the side of the wood. He didn't whimper. He didn't cry. He simply breathed her in on last time. Dagon cleared his throat, voice raw. She always knew the cost of staying silent, and she bore it. Ayla touched the rim of the urn gently. And still, she chose love. They covered it slowly. Fistfuls of earth fell like muted prayers. Neither spoke. When it was finished, Ayla placed a feather atop the mound-pale gray, soft as breath, one of Cale's blank Eder and age. It had come loose that morning when he shook off the dew. She didn't need a stone. This feather said more. As if sensing the finality, Cale stood, moved to the base of the tree, and sat. The wind caught in his fur, his silhouette, long and noble against the light. Ayla sat beside him. Dagon lowered himself beside her, stiff joints, protesting but yielding. And there they stayed, girl, father, dogland in quiet symmetry beneath a tree that had outlasted all their wars. Ayla didn't speak for a long while. When she did, her voice was barely more than a breeze. I used to think home was a place. Dagon tilted his head toward her. And now she looked ahead, not at the grave, not at the past, but at the branches above, woven like fingers holding a sky too wide to hold alone. Now I think it's who waits for you when the noise is gone. Cale gave a soft huff, resting his head on her knee. She stroked his fur with a hand that no longer trembled. Dagon stared at them both, his heart fuller and emptier than it had ever been. You remind me of her, he said. Only the good parts, I hope. Ayla smiled faintly. She didn't have bad parts, Dagon said quietly. Just ones I wasn't brave enough to understand. The wind picked up then just a whisper, just enough to rustle the branches. Above them, a single pine cone fell and landed softly near the grave. Ayla reached for it, turned it in her hand. Nature's strange and subtle punctuation. She left pieces of herself everywhere, Ayla said. Dagon nodded, especially in you. They stayed until the sun lowered enough that the light turned amber and the sky began to hum with evening. Cale stood first. He gave a soft chuff, turning to nudge Ayla with his nose. Time to go. Ayla rose. Dagon did too, slower. Before they turned back to the village, Ayla looked at the war tree one last time. She never asked for forgiveness, she said. She didn't need to, Dagon replied. She gave us something better. She gave us you, less. And together, with Kyle walking between them silent, strong, and steady, they returned to the path. Behind them, the war tree stood guard, its roots now holding not just the story of a tribe, but the soul of a woman who had dared to believe in a gentler kind of strength. The clearing where the old war dogs once trained was no longer a place of blood, barked commands, and brutal tests. Grass had softened the hard-packed dirt. Wildflowers, purple and gold, now grew along the fence line, and the echoes of violence had given way to laughter. Ayla stood barefoot in the field, a whistle strung loosely around her neck, though she never used it. At her side, Kyle sat upright, ears alert, eyes gentle. 3 pups tumbled at her feet, floppy-eared, all paws and no grace. They barked at their own shadows, chased insects, nipped at each other's tails. None had seen war. None had been taught fear. And Cale, once the terror of his kind, watched them with the patience of an old monk. Cale, Ayla whispered. Ready? He rose slowly, deliberate in his movement. His joints, though stiff from time and scars, moved with an unspoken wisdom. He trotted out, circling the pups, then lay in the dirt and let one gnaw gently at his ear. He didn't growl, didn't flinch, just let them learn. Nearby, other children were gathering. 6 boys and girls from the tribe's home barely walking. Others already running free climbed over rocks, skipped in the grass, calling Cale's name as if he were legend. To them, he was. Ayla knelt, drawing a line in the earth with her finger. Sit, she said softly, not to command but to teach. Not because you're afraid, because you understand. One of the pups cocked his head, confused. The others barked, rolled over, and Kyle finally stood, walked behind the unsure one, and gave it the faintest nudge. The pup sat. The others followed. It wasn't obedience. It was trust. Elder Maeve, standing beneath the arching cedar, watched from a distance. She hadn't spoken to Ayla since the day of the trial. Hadn't needed to, but today, she approached. Her steps slow, her cane clicking softly against stone. "You've made him a teacher," Maeve said, her voice barely above the wind. Ayla glanced up. He was always one. He just never had anyone willing to listen. Maeve's eyes fell on KL. "We tried to break him," she said, "to shape him into something that obeyed, not questioned. It made him dangerous." "And now?" Ayla asked, brushing dust from her knees. Maeve paused. "Now he's sacred." The pups played again, darting after butterflies. Kale gave Chassenot to catch, but to guide. He let them race ahead, then looped back, herding gently like a wind shaping leaves. One pup stumbled, yelped, but Kale didn't scold. He lowered his head and waited until the little one found its footing again. Ayla stood and joined Maeve. "There's a new kind of strength," she said, "not born from domination, but from connection." "And who taught you that?" Maeve asked, though she already knew. Ayla looked toward the edge of the field, where Dagon stood, arms crossed, watching them both. "My mother, Kale. Even you," she added, offering Maeve a quiet smile. "I was wrong," Maeve said at last. "We were all wrong." The sky above was open and pale, scattered with high clouds. The air carried no scent of smoke or blood-only pine, soil, and the warmth of the sun. For the first time in a generation, the training grounds had become a sanctuary. As the children began to mimic Kale's movements, growling, crouching, tailing the pups in play, Ayla moved to the center of the field. She raised no hand, gave no command. Instead, she spoke like Serena once, head low, certain, without need to control. "One day, you'll be protectors," she said. "Not because you are feared, but because you are trusted. You'll hear stories of Kale and wonder how a warrior so feared became the gentlest teacher. The answer is simple. He remembered who he was before the war." Kale, sensing her emotion, came to her side. His body pressed lightly against her leg, steady as stone. She placed a hand on his head. "And when they ask you who taught you," Ayla continued, "tell them you were not trained like dogs. You were raised like bridges." Maeve bowed her head. Somewhere beyond the trees, a bell from the village rang soft and low, its echo rolling through the hills. A signal not of alarm, but of change. Kale barked once, sharp, proud. The pups froze, looked up, then barked back. Ayla laughed. "Good boys," she whispered. She knew they wouldn't all grow to be guardians. Some might stay, others might roam, but the seed was planted, not just in them, but in the children who now watched with wide eyes and open hearts. The old way had cracked, and in its place, something new had rooted itself, lowly, gently, unshakably. Kale, once trained to bite, now taught how to wait. The girl, once orphaned, now stood as keeper of a legacy. And the tribe, once divided, had begun to heal in the most unlikely place, the laughter of children and the paw prints left in soft earth. A late summer moon hung low over the training field, fat, silver, and knowing. Its light pooled on the cleared dirt and damp grass where Kale and Ayla wandered like ghosts between rows of low wooden markers. Crickets flickered in the cooling air, and the scent of pine mingled with earth and dew. It was the kind of night that seemed to pause time, just long enough for heartbeats to echo. Ayla had wandered here without a plan. She'd said farewell to the new pups earlier, tucked them away for the night. Dagon had long since returned to the lodge. The council meetings, the decisions, they were done. The tribe was healing in its own way, different from hers, but happening. Yet something still called her here. Kale led the way. His paws were sure, silent. His muzzle lifted as he sensed the moon's pull. Ayla followed, the grind of gravel underfoot soft beneath her boots. She carried nothing but a scarf shrugged around her shoulders as if the world had quieted enough to be heard. They reached the edge of the field where the last lamppost stood dim, succumbing to moonlight. Kale paused, lifted his muzzle. His eyes locked skyward, a slow inhale. Then he howled. Not a command, Not training, not memory of battle, but a calling. A sound that reverberated against dark hills and settled over pine trunks. It spoke of loss, of promise, of home. Ayla watched, heart aching at the sound that was both wild and gentle. She knew then that this was Kale's way of holding space for something or someone beyond them. She took a step forward, then another, kept her distance, but brimming with need to share this moment. Then she lifted her own voices, softly, tremulously harmonizing with his howl. They sang together, a wail into the night sky that wasn't request or reflection. It was remembrance. When their voices fell away, the world returned, but softer. The moon drifted behind a thin cloud. The crickets quieted. Wind paused. Ayla approached Kyle, toe-to-toe. "You don't obey me," she whispered. "You don't need to." He pressed his flank to hers. The fur between her fingers was coarse and warm. She closed her eyes. The ache settled like a story, unfinished, now written. "He remembers her," Ayla whispered. "He remembers Serena." There was no answer from Kale, but his eyes glistened tiny mirrors of memory. He inhaled, then exhaled, and nudged a paw forward. Together, they moved back to the field's edge. Ayla sat on the ground dirt under her hands, sky overhead. Kale curled beside her, head on her lap. She stroked his ears till they were soft. In the pale moonlight, she saw every scar, each gray whisker, the way his breathing smoothed. And she realized this dog had been a storm. He'd weathered it, and tonight a new calm. "He's not mine," she said, "as much to him as to the moon. He never was, but he's ours." They sat like that for a long while. No words, no commands, only presence between girl and dog, between past and possibilities. Soon, the moon drifted from view. Dawn would come, and with it new work, training, healing, the kind that lasted years. But here, now, she closed her eyes and said a quiet prayer. "Thank you," she whispered, "for bringing us home." KL nudged her chin gently. His tail tapped twice against the ground. She felt it affirmation without instruction. When she opened her eyes, the field was empty. The night was deep. The world had waited and heard. They rose together, dog and girl. Memory and future walking back toward home. No howls, just the hush of feet on gravel and a new kind of grace growing inside both of them. In the quiet moments, it's not the medals or commands we remember, it's the soft eyes looking back at us, the steady presence by our side when words fall short. German shepherds like Kale remind us that loyalty isn't taught, it's lived. And the love we share with animals, especially dogs, has a way of healing wounds we don't always know we carry. If you've got a dog of your own, or maybe you're thinking of welcoming one, there's a world of quiet understanding waiting for you. I found a little resource that helps deepen that bond, not through tricks or tools, but through trust and presence. Nothing fancy, just something that spoke to me. If you're curious, I can point you to it. Take what you need, leave what you don't. But if this story stirred something in you, maybe it's time to lean into that connection. Dogs don't ask for much, just our hearts. And honestly, that's the easiest thing to give. Thanks for being here. Really.